Colleagues, the sitting is open. I remind members that they should... Joe, Mr. O'Reilly, Joe, Mr. Hispan. I remind members that they should insert the buds before taking the floor. As you begin your speech, please press the microphone button once only. Colleagues, the first item of business this afternoon is a current affairs debate on an urgent call for an immediate end to the humanitarian blockade of Gaza and the reinstatement of the ceasefire. The debate is limited to a maximum of 1 hour and 30 minutes. The first speaker is chosen by the Bureau and has 7 minutes now and 3 minutes to respond at the end. So I call the first speaker, Mr. Paul Galles, to take the floor. Paul.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur.
Thank you very much indeed, President. Colleagues. I have a rather difficult mission this afternoon to deal with a subject that is emotionally laden, very difficult, delicate, but enable us nevertheless to converge on one point, and that is a human right to receive humanitarian aid and assistance, nothing more but nothing less. It is therefore with great emotion and a profound sense of responsibility that I address myself to you this afternoon in order to conjure up the tragic fate of the people of Gaza over the last 18 months, but more so since the humanitarian blockade was put in place and the ceasefire was broken by Israel last month. Our Assembly has already expressed its deep concern and its consternation over the unimaginable humanitarian crisis that continues to weigh heavily on Gaza following Israel's response to the terrible attack of the 7th of October 2023 conducted by Hamas and other terrorist organizations, during which more than 1,400 Israeli citizens were assassinated under horrific conditions. So therefore, I think it is important to repeat straight away our firm condemnation of the attacks of October 2023 and to appeal once again for the safe return of all the remaining hostages and of the bodies of those who perished during their captivity. I think we were all shocked by the inhuman and degrading treatment meted out to the Israeli hostages held by the terrorist organization Hamas. At the same time, colleagues, the treatment meted out to the Gazans, in particular women and children, well, it's hard to qualify. And what happened recently in Gaza just confirms me in my belief that we have an absolute need to come to the assistance of the population in Gaza. We're assisting powerlessly at the destruction and constant dismantling of the infrastructure in Gaza, an inconceivable number of dead and wounded, including very many women and children. The airstrikes that have been conducted since the 18th of March have led to a further 1,000 Palestinian deaths, if not more, including humanitarian workers. Women and children who've died represent some 60% of those killed and 56% of those who've been wounded. And these deaths are to be added to the more than 50,000 deaths or death toll since the beginning of operations in Gaza. And behind these figures, let us not forget that every person, every child has a name, a family, and a history. And yet, no humanitarian aid or assistance has got through to the Gaza Strip since the 2nd of March. What does that mean? In sort of concrete terms, it means the life of 2 million people is in immediate danger as a result of the lack of water and food. The Palestinians in Gaza are subjected to famine and deprived of the most elementary needs. They are trapped and they are dying. They are dying on their homeland without any means of protecting themselves. Children are forced to beg in order to obtain a few drops of water. Their schools have been destroyed. Entire families have been separated during massive displacement of the population, and some families have been totally decimated. Patients and medical staff have been trapped and killed under hospitals and under the bombing. these bombing attacks, whether they're sort of random or targeted, have led to the death of UN staff, humanitarian workers and journalists. And this prolonged blockade also affects medical supplies today. There's no one hospital in Gaza that's fully operational and that is able to come to the assistance of those in need. Healthcare for future mothers, for example, virtually inexistent. Childbirth, one could say, has almost become synonymous of child death. In spite of the appeals for humanitarian medical evacuation, they're virtually impossible to carry out. And it is certain that the consequences on mental health of these systematic and targeted attacks on civilians in Gaza will be felt for generations to come. We are alarmed by the attacks and restrictions imposed on humanitarian workers, whereas their only aim, their only objective is to provide a human, neutral form of assistance. The UN, the ICRC, MSF have had to take very difficult decisions to scale down the number of their international aid workers and their activities. Colleagues, we've seen during previous discussions on the situation, the humanitarian situation in Gaza, that the subject gives rise to very lively emotions and firmly held views. I hope, nevertheless, that today we can engage in this debate with a shared sense of humanity. My colleague Frank Schwaber, a socialist, in a previous debate said, we are the Council of Europe. We care about human rights and the rule of law. We are the Council of Europe, as he said. After this debate, therefore, on the absolute need for humanitarian assistance, and I think we need to come up with immediate answers or replies, I think we will need to look at the political and legal consequences of the situation that has unfolded over the last 18 months, in particular with regard to issues of responsibility, failure to comply with the 49 Geneva Conventions and the Rome Statute, and on the way in which the situation will have repercussions on the very principle of respect for international law and humanitarian law. Our Assembly, sooner or later, is going to have to look at these issues. Our aim must be to promote a global and lasting peace that respects the rights and aspirations of the Israeli and Palestinian peoples, together with our valuable allies, the Knesset and the Palestinian National Council. But now, colleagues, I think we need to join our voice to that of the international community to call upon all parties to resume negotiations with a view to guaranteeing the complete, rapid and permanent implementation of a ceasefire. We also need to raise our voices to call on Israel, whose parliament benefits from observer status with our parliamentary assembly, to demand immediate humanitarian access to Gaza. Even if we are politicians, here in this debate this afternoon, we're not talking about the political conflict, but rather about an inhuman humanitarian situation. Peoples who are always the first victims and the weakest victims in any conflict have an unshakable right to humanitarian assistance. No more deaths, no one death more. Thank you.
I call now on behalf of the European People's Party, Joseph O'Reilly. Joe, you have the floor.
Thank you, President. I am honoured to speak on behalf of the
Microphone, please.
Listen to you. Have you inserted your badge?
Thank you, President. I am honoured to speak on behalf of the EPP. At the outset, may I again stress our abhorrence of the 7th of October 23 Hamas atrocities. We are equally abhorrent of the completely disproportionate and obscene Israeli response. We have had 18 months of genocide, physical destruction of schools, hospitals, universities, and thousands of homes erased to the ground. Greatest victims are women and children. This is confirmed by the UN and the International Court of Justice judgment. In the last 18 months, more than 51,000 people have been killed and 2.2 million displaced. On the 23rd of March of this year, 15 emergency responders were killed. Over as a sideshow, if you like, but an abhorrent sideshow, over 4,000 have been displaced in the West Bank and the West Bank also. The blockade in Gaza puts 2.4 million people in famine conditions. Since the most recent renewal of hostilities, 1,482 Palestinians have been killed. So what do we need now? First of all, we need an immediate ceasefire. Then we need humanitarian aid on a grand scale to go in. We, of course, need the repatriation of the hostages. We need the reconstruction of homes and basic infrastructure. And there's a moral prerogative on us Western European countries to fund that and be at the forefront there. We need to return to normal life in Gaza. If not, our member states, if this does not happen, our member states, on our exhortation, will have to take a more radical stance involving sanctions, cessation of military assistance, and all the steps necessary to bring about the cessation of hostilities, which I hope can happen shortly through negotiation, which will be the preferred option. As an international community, we should be building and working towards a functioning Palestinian state with normal structures alongside a functioning Israeli state. That has to be the long-term ambition, but the short-term ambition is to get the ceasefire back in place, to get the humanitarian aid in, to restore normal life, to rebuild homes, to rebuild infrastructure, to remove famine, to rebuild schools, universities and hospitals, and to set up a normal society. And what is existing at the moment is an abomination, and our grandchildren will ask us, what did we do about this?
Thank you. Thank you so much. Oleksiy Goncharenko, on behalf of the European Conservatives, Patriots and Affiliates. Oleksiy, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. Definitely what's going on in Gaza today is an awful tragedy. But each tragedy has those who are responsible in it, and each tragedy has causes. Who is responsible for all this horror that's happening today in Gaza? It's terrorists from Hamas. It's clear to everybody, everybody knows this. In October 2023, on October 7, awful terroristic attack of Hamas started this war. It's great, I hear it's time to rebuild Gaza. Fantastic, fantastic. How to do this when Hamas is still in charge there? How to do this? That's the question today. And we can't put a blind eye on this. It's impossible. But by the way, I have one more question. We still have in our assembly here Palestine as a partner for democracy. With all respect, what is democracy in Palestine? Last elections on the Western Bank in 2005, this is democracy. I will be happy to see democratically elected representatives of Palestine here, but democratically elected when it will happen. That now it's not the case. It's not the case today. In Gaza, Hamas is ruling. That's also what we know. And today we're meeting just hours before a great Jewish holiday, Pesach. And on Pesach, all Jewish families should be together, having their Seder together. And it's time to give back hostages. They have a right and they should be with their families today. After 18 months of tortures, of the hell which they're going through. That's what we need to say. That's what we need to do. Israel is democracy, and we are democracy. We need to support those who have the same values with us, with all our forces. It's time to do this, because any other way leads us nowhere, absolutely nowhere. Terrorists should be destroyed or should be taken to the prison. Hostages should go home. That's what should be done. And after this, definitely, Gaza should be rebuilt. Gaza should be a prosperous, wonderful place, because in other case, that will never happen. And all of you know this, no difference what you are saying. So I want to say, Hag Pesach Sameach, Am Israel Hai. We are with Israel.
Thank you, Alexei. On behalf of the Liberal Democrats, Sal Brinton.
Mr. President, the attack on Hamas on innocent Israeli citizens on the 7th of October 2023 was illegal, appalling, and unforgivable. And under the Statute of International Criminal Court, the taking of hostages constitutes a war crime in both international and non-international armed conflict. Hamas should return the remaining hostages immediately. And it is right for pace, with our focus on human rights and the rule of international law, that this debate focuses on the very specific issues relating to Gaza. UNICEF reported at the end of March that 322 children were dead and 609 injured since the ceasefire ended. That's a daily average of around 100 children killed or maimed each day. On the 3rd of April, there was an emergency meeting at the UN Security Council at which the Human Rights Chief, Mr. Volker Turk, reported that Israeli military operations have killed more than 1,200 Palestinians since the end of the ceasefire. He also listed a large number of other humanitarian crises, including the continued blockade of food and medical supplies, with the IDF demolishing previous camps and forcing further movement of Palestinian refugee families, many of whom cannot find food or water. Last week, the IDF admitted that its soldiers had fired on and killed 15 members of a Red Crescent convoy. The convoy had followed protocol, notified the IDF, used flashing lights, and yet they were all shot dead. Just this week, the international farmers' organization La Via Campesina reported that bread has disappeared from markets. Palestinians are dying from dehydration and untreated wounds. All bakeries and flour mills have been destroyed. Fuel, water, electricity, and medical supplies remain blockaded. This is an engineered famine. 93% of Palestinians are facing acute food insecurity, bringing Gaza to Integrated Food Security Phase Classification 5, extermination by starvation, the highest level of food insecurity, which indicates widespread death due to starvation, extremely critical acute malnutrition, and collapse of livelihood systems. What is happening in Gaza satisfies the elements of genocide as defined under Article 2C of the Genocide Convention. That's the deliberate infliction of conditions of life calculated to bring about the physical destruction of a group in whole or in part. There is a route out of this, an immediate release of the blockades and the hostages too, and a ceasefire, and then a longer-term aim for a political settlement with the two states learning to live side by side with equal rights and dignity.
Thank you. Thank you, Baroness Brinton. On behalf of the United European Left, Sevim Dagdelen.
Herr Präsident,
President, ladies and gentlemen, a lot can be said about the Gaza war, and there are many different opinions, but I think we all agree on one thing, that without the support from the West, especially from the USA and its European NATO allies, especially Germany, it would not be possible for Israel to wage war against the Palestinians. Without the weapons from the USA and Germany, without subsidies from the EU, the war crimes of Benjamin Netanyahu's extreme right government would be impossible. Therefore, the governments from the EU and NATO countries are complicit in the violation of international law and the scale of the violation of human rights of the Palestinians, which is difficult to call anything other than a genocide. President Trump, together with Netanyahu, wants ethnically to cleanse the Gaza Strip, and Israel has stopped the delivery of humanitarian aid and is about completely to occupy the Gaza Strip militarily. The governments who support this slavishly in Europe, can we call them anything other than complicit? It is a scandal that these crimes are being supported by supposed democracies. You might not notice this, but nobody will seek to discredit those who support these people and who claim to be in favor of humanity, democracy and mentioning it. The most shameful thing are the rhetorical pirouettes designed to disguise what's going on. For instance, the German foreign minister has condemned the fact that Hungary is leaving the ICC, and at the same time, the current and future German chancellors say that they would not implement the arrest warrant against Benjamin Netanyahu. But we can no longer deceive people. Over 50,000 Palestinians have been killed by the Israeli security forces. 70% of them are women and children. The responsibility for this is with those who deliver weapons to Israel. We need an immediate ceasefire and also stopping weapons deliveries, because Palestinians must have a right to life. Yesterday, my colleague asked for a minute's silence to remember Ukrainian children. I ask you today, ladies and gentlemen, to stand up and to show a minute's silence for the children in Gaza who've been killed in Gaza.
In that point, I have said twice in the past, when a colleague which is respected wants to ask for a moment of silence, he or she has first to refer to the Secretariat, and then the Presidium will decide. The previous time that it was happened, I decided that we can have it. If and when, it is only to the President and the Presidium to decide. Please follow this. This is something that I always ask from you. With respect to what we have said, we will not hold it now, maybe later. Please, let us go. Yesterday I was not presiding, and it was a mistake by the Presidium. But I have said many times that we should follow some directions. And if we want to follow rules in this room, to respect each other, please respect, first of all, the President who presides at that moment. Yes, this is exactly what I have said. It was a mistake. Yesterday, it was a mistake of the Presidium. Though I don't remember who was the colleague who was presiding. But if you want a moment of silence, you will first have to ask from the Secretariat. And then it will be provided. I will not deny that. But please, whenever, let us be logic, if I may. It's not unlogical what you have decided or what you have said, but I want the Presidium to decide. After your demand, after your proposal, I respect all aspects. But please respect the way that this assembly has to function, okay? You can go on now and ask from the Secretariat, and later on we will decide on that. Thank you.
Sagen, ich würde das unterstützen.
I just say that I would support this if, as yesterday, so it was a mistake by the...
Right.
Ja, der
You are
Präsident selber ist
absolutely
gestern
right.
aufgestanden.
But he stood up himself yesterday.
I have to inform all vice presidents. We have changes in vice presidents. Yesterday, it was a mistake, not what happened, I mean, not acceptance of the minute of silence. I do not disagree with the acceptance, but the time, the way that it was happened, and the procedure followed, it was the wrong procedure. Please go on with the procedure that I kindly ask you all, and I now address to all the colleagues. Whenever you want to ask for a moment of silence, first ask the Secretariat, and then the President will decide if and when. This is the procedure. We are going now on. Madame Dadzlen. Sevim, I have noted your request. So we're going now to Saskia Kluit, who is representing the Socialists, Greens and Democrats. Parakalo. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, President. In January, we adopted the report on the humanitarian crisis for women and children in Gaza. looking especially in the dramatic effects for women, children, and the hostages. And we promised then to follow everything that was going on in the area. And soon after our plenary, a much-needed ceasefire was achieved, and NGOs could bring in goods, take care of the wounded, bring extra wounded abroad, and dead hostages could be brought home, and luckily alive ones were released. But here we are again. And the situation is even a bigger disaster than it was before. The damage to our protective system of international humanitarian law is being tested to the maximum by what is going on in Gaza. We see this week that Premier Netanyahu proudly sits next to the President of the United States while openly discussing a cleansing of Palestinians from Gaza. We see mass graves of aid workers being discovered. We see recurrence of violence where 100 children a day are either dead or wounded. This is a nightmare, and it is of epic proportions. I will walk past the main points that we made. One was full and unconditional transport of humanitarian aid. Israel has failed completely, not only with the first that implementing the full ban on UNRWA, and secondly by implementing since 4 weeks the complete and the illegal full siege of Gaza. The people are being starved. We are starving 2 million people. I don't have to remember all of us that hunger as a weapon of war is in very grave violation of international humanitarian law. Secondly, the protection of safe working conditions for humanitarian workers. We held this week in the SOC committee another hearing with Doctors Without Borders and UK Med. We talked to them in September, and we talk to them now. Due to the full siege, the situation is extremely bad, and prospects for medical system are even worse. The medical goods will go on for another 2 to 3 weeks, and then we see again children being treated without sedation and people being operated without proper care. And we must remember we're talking about large part about children and women. Full blockage of medical goods requests the strongest condemnation from our parliament. At the same hearing, we heard witnesses of attacks on humanitarian workers. The message was it's not decreasing, it is increasing, and the top was the mass grave of aid workers. And then, last but not least, since the ceasefire broke, no hostage has been released. The life of hostages are at grave danger. Most have been released during negotiations and not during war. They suffer also immensely when there's a full blockage. They don't get help, they don't get food, and they get bombed just as anybody else. So they need to be brought home, and the best way is to relaunch the ceasefire, a fight with all our might for them. So,
thank you, Saskia.
As I want to add up, I think our role is to uphold international humanitarian law and speaking to our governments that they need to act accordingly. And as a reporter, I will go to the Committee of Ministers to discuss upholding international law.
Thank you, Saskia. Zeynep Yildiz is next. Zeynep.
Thank you, President. Dear colleagues, this institution was born from the rubbles of the Second World War and with the shame of the Holocaust to say never again for new ones. Yet the Europe, still burdened by the Holocaust and the genocide in Bosnia, now risks failing to stop another one. In the very beginning, UNRWA's former spokesperson, Chris Gunness, described the situation in Gaza as a genocide being live-streamed. Over a year later, there is no live stream because no one left. The journalists, children, and women have been killed by Israel. And still, we discuss this issue as a current affairs debate. Dear colleagues, there is no task more urgent and immediate than stop, or at least speak out against an ongoing genocide. It is shameful that we hesitate to use the urgent affairs procedure to condemn the ethnic cleansing in Gaza with a declaration on behalf of this assembly. As history writes a shameful next chapter, I ask, will you bear the burden of silence? The ceasefire, built with immense effort, was shattered again by Israel. Since March 18, over 1,200 Palestinians have been killed in renewed airstrikes. A third of them were children, according to UNICEF. Gaza's population is now 90% internally displaced. As of 27th of March, women and children represent 60% of the persons murdered and 56% of injured. On April 2, bakeries supported by World Food Programme shut down. Early in this morning, Antonio Guterres said more than a month has passed without a drop of aid into Gaza. There is no floor, no water, no electricity in Gaza. Dozens of children have frozen to death in tents. More have died from starvation. Every day, 15 children suffer life-altering injuries. Nearly 40,000 children have been orphaned. 1.95 million people face acute food insecurity. 60,000 children are at serious risk of malnutrition. Over 700,000 students have no access to education.
Press the mic again. Something happened.
There's a problem with the microphone.
Can you please go to the next?
Then I'm moving.
Let us hold the time if we can.
Is it working? Okay. Thank you. UN reports after IDF's declaration 64% of Gaza as a military zone, fear of permanent displacement for 2.3 million residents raised. Civilians have nowhere left to flee. This is not just a tragedy, to be clear, this is domicide, this is sociocide, and this is genocide. We must reinstate the ceasefire, lift the blockade, suspend arms transfer to Israel, stop forced displacement of the people of Gaza, and prevent illegal settlements to the Gaza, uphold international law, and rebuild Gaza for only its own people. I sincerely appreciate my colleagues wholeheartedly who prefers to stand on the side of humanity for their courage and being just human. Palestine exists, the people of Palestine exist. Within a two-state solution, from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. Thank you.
Thank you, Zeynep. Boa Bismuth is next.
Thank you, Mr. President. Maybe I'm naive. But I would expect any international institution today, including your honorable institution, where we are very proud to be observant, to call today for the release of the Israeli hostages, 59 hostages, still after 1.5 years in captivity in Gaza. This is what I would expect. I would expect it to be done, you know what, not every day, not every week, but at least every month. I would expect in every speech, to hear about hostages again and again and again, because you perfectly well that you know that if those hostages were not in the hands of those, how would I say, modern barbarians, modern Huns, modern vandals, you wouldn't have a war in Gaza, because as you know, Israel was not even present in Gaza, and there would not be a war in Gaza. Yeah, there is a war, because they came to our territory to kill us, to kidnap us, to rape us, but this apparently doesn't shock some of your participants in this current debate. I would like to thank my Ukrainian friend Alexei for, first of all, for his kind words and for reminding that this weekend is going to be a very precious day for us, for all Jews around the world are going to celebrate our freedom. We were slaves in Egypt thousands of years ago, and today we are free people, but 59 are not free. And you must understand, when you call for Israel to stop a war, in fact, what do you call? You call for me to forget 59 of my fellow people. Now, I have a duty towards their family. I have a duty towards them. I have a duty towards the Israeli nation. I have a duty towards history to bring them back. How do I bring them back from a terrorist group? You tell me. So all the ones who give me now moral lessons and tell me how I should act, what in fact they do, in fact they tell me to forget 59 of my people. Now, I heard many things today in some of the speeches right now, but there was some, how would I say, how come? I always wonder how people, have no problem whatsoever to come and say things which are totally opposite of the reality. And I will explain. In January, I was there. I came to see you, of course, in order to speak about the report. I think Ms. Saskia, the Dutch member of parliament, my Dutch colleague, prepared a report. In this report, we spoke in the preparation of the report to speak about all the humanitarian aid Israel is giving inside. More than 1.5 million tons at the time in January. Was there any response? I don't think it was even mentioned in your report. I heard now speaking about journalists being killed in Gaza. No, mistake. Journalists from Gaza came to Israel and killed our people. How do I know? They filmed themselves. They were proud of it. When I asked in the report to show it, no, you refused. Not enough proof, of course. Let's continue. People in Gaza from hospitals, from mosques, from schools, keeping our hostages and doing the terrorist acts. Was it in the report? Of course it wasn't in the report. But I have to tell you one thing that is very important. The claims of starvation in Gaza are false. Massive amounts of humanitarian aid have entered Gaza. The recent hostage release ceremonies that you all saw showed that all Hamas members and Gazan present appear to be in good condition, while the only ones who were starved were hostages. And all the world has seen it. But it's so easy to speak about genocide. It is so easy to speak about starvation. And the last thing, because Mr. President, you spoke about humanitarian law, because it was mentioned. Under international humanitarian law, in particular Article 23, and I finish, on the 4th Geneva Convention and Article 70 of the first protocol to the Geneva Conventions, a party may take into account security and military considerations and establish necessary technical arrangement and supervision on the entry of goods. Now, this obligation, and I conclude by that, is also subject to the condition that there are no serious reasons to fear that consignments will be diverted from the civilian destination or otherwise to the advantage of the enemy's military effort. I will conclude by saying, Turkish friend, no, I will only say that even the microphone couldn't bear her lies. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bo.
Thank you.
Don't worry, colleagues. I believe that I'm just in cases like this. I now call our colleague Bernard Sabella to take the floor. Bernard.
Thank you, Mr. President. The humanitarian crisis in the Gaza Strip resembles depictions of Dante's Inferno. Statistics of victims of indiscriminate bombings, destruction of medical, educational, water, electricity, welfare infrastructures, and the near famine experienced by thousands of Gazans all speak to the hellish conditions under which the population of Gaza lives today. This war targets Palestinians because of who they are. The recent indiscriminate killings of medical personnel, together with what is happening in the refugee camps of the West Bank, whether in Nablus, Tulkarem, or Jenin, authenticate this. Thousands have been forced to leave their homes in these refugee camps in an apparent plan by the Israeli authorities to get rid of these camps. This all in order for the political wish of influential members in the current Israeli cabinet to see not only the Palestinian narrative erased, but also the habitations and inhabitants that remind one of the Nakba that befell our Palestinian people in 1948. Amidst all this, an opening of hope expressed by no other than the French President Emmanuel Macron, who recently spoke about the possible recognition of France of a Palestinian state this coming June. Mr. Macron's statement is a reminder of the most urgent need for a political solution that would see a Palestinian state living at peace side by side with Israel. The Palestinian Authority has consistently called for a negotiated agreement based on the two-state solution and the relevant international resolutions and conventions. Israel instead, the Israeli government instead, has gone the other way and deepened the divisions between Palestinians in the Gaza Strip and Palestinians in the West Bank in order to prevent the establishment of a Palestinian state. But most important at the moment is to work towards a resumption of the ceasefire that would also free not only the 59 Israeli hostages who should be with their homes, with their families to celebrate Pesach, but also the thousands of Palestinian children and women living in perpetual fear and experiencing famine and other horrid conditions. PACE and the Council of Europe need to heed Mr. Macron's statement on recognition of a Palestinian state as a reminder that the values of democracy, human rights, and the rule of law should always be coupled by a political will to resolve outstanding conflicts, not only within Europe, but also in its neighborhood, specifically in our case, the tragedy that has befallen Gaza and the persistent and not finished yet the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. You have a heavy responsibility that should be exercised in order for Palestinians and Israelis to live side by side in peace in two separate but harmonious states. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bernard. Next is Michael Farrugia.
Chair, dear colleagues, may I ask you to close your eyes? Now, I invite you to take yourself to a country, your homeland, an overpopulated land, a land that has been occupied for tens of years, and you dream. You dream of liberty, freedom, and self-government. You also dream of unanimous UN support for your fellow citizens and your country, and the eventual adherence to the UN resolution by all sides. The resistance in you is no excuse for what happened on 7th October 2023, the attack by Hamas on Israel, leading to the killing of hundreds, abuse, and the abduction of hostages taken away from their families. Israel had the right to defend itself, but not to create a humanitarian crisis in Gaza, a scenario condemned by most international fora, including in this assembly last January. Keep your eyes closed. Look around you. What do you see? Daily bombardments. More than 50,000 of your countrymen killed, mainly children and women, not to mention doctors, nurses, aid workers, journalists. Tens of thousands of children are either mutilated and or orphaned. More than 115,000 wounded, thousands missing. Your home and nearly each and every home in your homeland in rubble. Educational institutions, hospitals demolished. Maternal and reproduction healthcare facilities bombed. Your country has been flattened. You and any remaining persons of your family continuously displaced. You are faced with dire shortages of food, water, medicines, and other much-needed humanitarian supplies. You are now reading UNICEF report about 1 million children deprived of life, saving aid for weeks on end. Much-needed aid blocked from entering your country. Children around you cannot dream of growing up. They have been robbed of their family, education, healthcare, their home, but also of their dreams. You can open your eyes now. You are not dreaming. This is the daily humanitarian crisis of Palestinians living in Gaza. These are human beings we are talking about, not mere numbers. Human beings that are also being threatened with their expulsion from their homeland to build, what is it called? A nice Mediterranean resort. It is our responsibility as Council of Europe parliamentarians to protect the right for all citizens to live safely and free in one's homeland. Once again, As Council of Europe parliamentarians, we advocate the immediate release of the hostages, the immediate ceasefire, all humanitarian aid and medical assistance to reach unhindered to all parts of Gaza with immediate effect, the two-state solution, the rebuilding of Gaza for Gazans. Peace. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Michael. Alfred here is next. Alfred.
President, we are discussing the situation in Gaza every session, and every time the title is wrong. Again, we are asking for an immediate end to the humanitarian blockade of Gaza and the reinstatement of the ceasefire, but that's wrong. We should ask for the immediate release of the hostages. That's the root of the problem and nothing else. Gaza is a cesspool of terror that's holding innocent hostages in its grip. Israel stands alone as a democracy in a sea of despotism, yet is slandered while battling an enemy that kidnaps its people and fires rockets at its cities. The chaos in Gaza is the bloody harvest of Hamas, a terrorist gang that values death over life. These monsters have turned Gaza into a fortress of war, stashing rockets in nurseries, bunkers, hospitals, schools, mosques, all while clutching civilians as shields. And they've got the goal to hold hostages, some daughters, parents ripped from their homes, caged in tunnels, caged in pipes. Hamas fires at Israeli towns, and when Israel heads back, they are wailing. Where is the rage of the Council of Europe when those innocent people were abducted from Israel? Where is the outcry when Hamas hoard aid to fund terror? I never heard anything about it. Israel does not crave for this war. It sued for peace and pulled out of Gaza in 2005, only to get hostages and rockets in return. Every strike, every soldier that is sent to Gaza is to protect the people of Israel and bring the captives home. Gaza could have been a jewel on the Mediterranean, but Hamas choose hostages and hate over hope. They have chained their own people to misery and Israel to torment. The Council of Europe should ask for the release of the hostages. The double standard in this House makes my stomach turn. You are weeping for Gaza's plight from cushy armchairs, ignoring the Israeli families shattered by loss and abduction. Israel fights for its survival. If Hamas freed the hostages and dropped its weapon, peace would dawn tomorrow. If Israel dropped its weapon, we will have a second Holocaust. So, show off your call for restraint. Would you stay calm if your loved ones are rotting in Hamas dungeons? Stand with Israel, and I don't want to hear no more excuses in this House. The Council of Europe and our body has to ask for the release of these hostages now. Thank you.
Thank you, Alfred. Pierre-Alain Frides is next. Pierre-Alain.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, President. Colleagues, I'd like to start by recalling some fundamental facts. I'm in favour of the two-state solution. Israel has the right to exist and to be a state. The Palestinian people has the right to exist and to have a state. The Hamas attack on the 7th of October was an unacceptable escalation, and it should be condemned. It was an escalate because the conflict didn't start on that day, and I call for the immediate release of all the hostages. Having said that, because I don't want anyone to think that I'm not impartial, I would like to mention a number of points. After months of blind war, and after almost a year of a blockade and deprivation of food and lack of basic medical care, tens of thousands of civilian victims, women and children, the destruction of schools and hospitals, a territory in ruin, and the targeted killing of journalists. At the beginning of 2025, we seem to be in a situation of total horror. There should be exchanges of principle. There should be access to food and care. But instead of this, the army has caused more victims, and there's been more deprivation for the people of Gaza. Why? Recently, I looked at the Noah Overland film. I watched the Noah Overland. This is a private film that was shown in Los Angeles, Lyon, and Berlin, and it got the Oscar for the best documentary. It's not been distributed in the United States. It gives a direct description of the policy of colonization in Palestine, where Palestinian villages are placed in a military area. The people are expelled from their homes. In fact, we're in a situation where you get the impression that both in Gaza and in other Palestinian territories, Israel is seeming to engage in ethnic cleansing of those territories. This is totally unacceptable, and I regret the pusillanimous attitude of this council. Just having an urgent debate when we're talking about something that should stop immediately. We should have had an urgent debate, not just a current affairs debate. We should have a proper report to set out what we require. There should be an end to the humanitarian blockade, an immediate ceasefire, and naturally the release of the hostages. Thank you.
Thank you, Pierre Alain. Abdurrahman Babajan is next.
Thank you, Mr. President, dear colleagues. For about 19 months, the world has been witnessing a modern-day genocide whose effects will spread to generations. On these platforms and other international platforms, we are sadly experiencing a period of shame that has suddenly rendered meaningless all the civilized norms that humanity claimed to have established after all the hardships it has endured. Just like in past examples, the effects of what happened in Gaza during this period will also be passed on to generations, and human dignity as a whole will definitely be questioned in the long term. Moreover, such major ruptures will lead to new long-term ruptures in societies. Right now, we are using sentences to justify ourselves because we are trying to hide the truth and remain silent in face of what's being done in the short term. However, this platform could have played a leading role. This institution, which includes Palestine and Israel as observer members, was established after a series of dramatic events and promised the world a future centered on human rights, human dignity, and democracy, with its declaration that it learned lessons from these events. Unfortunately, remain under the shadow of blind and shallow, narrow, pragmatic motives. Condemning October 7th and finding it unacceptable is one thing, putting aside. But immediately after that, trying to turn October 7th into a political, military, geopolitical interest for itself, and trying to whitewash its systematic and deliberate ethnic genocide policy of dehumanizing the future of Palestine, specifically by targeting children in a blind manner, is totally another. Why is it so difficult to approach what happened after October from a just and human perspective? Is it because a Palestinian or an Eastern or a Muslim who was killed that our consciousness and human dignity instincts are not activated? Is it because of historical baggage? Is it because of incredible circle created by Zionist capital, the media, whose dominate universities and academia, and big corporations that frightens people? So, let's do something together here. Let's oppose any situation that harms civilians with the same principle, same determination, and same clarity. Let's take concrete steps to ensure that hostages are released, and at the same time, Israel cannot carry out a single harmful action against civilians in Palestine anymore, in a political, military, and legally permanent manner. Let's enforce our countries to establish a politically military pact among the countries under the roof of the Council of Europe to urgently stop Israel's massacres of civilians, and to enforce our countries to stop transferring weapons to Israel, and to get sanctions on Israel in social, cultural, political, military, economic, in every sphere of life. And let's urgently establish a multi-group mission within the Council with the delegation of different political groups and independent parliamentaries to control and monitor on the unrestricted delivery of humanitarian to Gaza, Rafah, Han Yunis, and other regions. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Abdurrahman. Annika Strantel.
Mr. President, dear colleagues, we stand at a critical hour. In Gaza, a humanitarian catastrophe is unfolding before our very eyes. For over a month, not a single convoy of food or medicine or fuel has been allowed in. More than 2.1 million people are trapped, bombed, starved, and deprived of basic life necessities. The United Nations General Secretary warns that Gaza is a killing field, and the civilians are in an endless death loop. With crossings sealed, aid is piling up at the gates, while children, women, and men suffer inside. This assembly cannot meet in Strasbourg and look away as an entire population is strangled by siege. We must act with urgency, and we must act with moral clarity. The humanitarian toll in Gaza defies comprehension. Since the conflict started, over 50,000 Palestinians have been killed and more than 114,000 wounded. Thousands of these are children. 65% of Gaza's land is now effectively a death zone under evacuation orders, with over 280,000 people displaced in the last 2 weeks alone. Each statistic is a life, a family, a human story, and a stark reminder of our collective failure to protect civilians. The Council of Europe was founded to prevent such atrocities. For 75 years, our mission has been to defend human rights, democracy, and the rule of law. That legacy obliges us to speak out today. When we declared never again in the aftermath of war, it was not meant to apply only to Europe. Our values has no borders. International humanitarian law is clear. An occupying power must ensure that the population has access to food and medical care. Yet in Gaza, we see the opposite. Therefore, let us be absolutely clear in our appeal today. The hostages should be released. There should be an end to the humanitarian blockade of Gaza immediately. Open the crossings to food, water, and medicine, to hope and life. Restore the ceasefire at once and stop the bloodshed. Thank you.
Thank you, Annika. Mehmet Akalin, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. Dear colleagues, we stand today at a crossroads of conscience. The humanitarian blockade in Gaza currently in place is not merely a geopolitical strategy, it is a violation of basic human rights and dignity. Innocent civilians, families, children, the elderly Palestinians are being deprived of food, water, medicine, safety, and killed by bombings every day. This is not just a crisis, it's a moral failure. We cannot look away. No political aim, no military objective can ever justify the sufferings of entire population. The deliberate denial of humanitarian aid is a breach of international law and a stain on our collective humanity. We must remember the rules of war are meant to protect the most vulnerable, not to bend for convenience or forgotten in silence. We should call on all parties to lift the blockade immediately and allow unfettered access to humanitarian assistance. Aid organizations must be permitted to do their life-saving work without obstruction or threat. Civilians must never be used as pawns in conflict. Furthermore, We must call urgently for the reinstatement of a ceasefire and to start to work on two-state solution. Peace is not a weakness. It is a bravest choice in the face of escalating violence. A ceasefire opens the door to diplomacy, to rebuilding, and to the protection of human life. Let us be clear, every day without a ceasefire is another day of unnecessary death and despair. We must demand accountability, we must demand action, and above all, we must demand humanity. The world is watching, and history will remember where we stood. Thank you.
Thank you, Mehmet. George Lukaidis is next. George.
I feel the need to congratulate the speakers on behalf of the political groups, except, of course, Mr. Koncharenko, and allow me to wonder, since when supporting a genocide, the worst crime under international law, is in line with the values of this organization. Secondly, I want to express my deep regret for the fact that we are not discussing under urgent affairs debate procedure. And we have no resolution and no recommendation. Once more, dear colleagues, Gaza is bleeding for 18 months now. Since the collapse of the ceasefire in mid-March, Israel's assault has escalated into a merciless campaign against the defenseless population. The death toll has now surpassed 50,000. Two-thirds of the victims are women and children. At least 1,000 children are killed or injured each week. This is not a war. It is an extermination. It is a genocide. It is the consequence of a deliberate strategy, the decimation of civilian life, the destruction of hospitals, schools, water systems, even refugee shelters. The healthcare system has collapsed. 243 UNRWA workers have been killed. Over 90% of Gaza's population has been displaced, many, multiple times, forced to sleep under plastic and rain and ruins. Diseases spread through overcrowded camps without medicine, food, or clean water. The PACE resolution adopted in January acknowledged the truth. The PACE resolution adopted in January. Gaza is collapsing in blatant violation of international law, and Israel has not been held accountable, even though the International Court of Justice has ordered Israel to stop its acts of genocide, and the ICC has issued arrest warrants. Yet, nothing has changed, because some of us choose silence, while others continuously supply arms and weapons to Israel, most notably the United States. The EU and many European member states remain passive, hiding behind vague calls for de-escalation, while at the same time enabling Israel to carry out its genocide. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, George. Thank you, George. Seda Guerin-Berluc is next.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much, President. There is a genocide in Gaza, in Palestine, and I'm going to have to use the word genocide several times because I think we have to remind ourselves that we have to give priority to the genocide in Gaza in one of the most important international fora here worldwide, here the Council of Europe. Do you recall the last time you saw an ambulance going past with sirens blaring? Can you recall the profound sense of respect on the part of other vehicle drivers in order to let the ambulance go past? But on the 23rd of March in the morning, images from the town of Rafah show ambulances trying to get through, but they were shot down as they attempted to advance. 15 health workers were targeted and killed by Israel. The Israeli army, firstly with some effrontery, said that, or denied the facts, but then said there was a failure of coordination. And yet the images published by many media prove the opposite. Darlene Winder from the International Red Cross said it's one of the bloodiest attacks since 2017. Colleagues, since the 7th of October 2023, Israel has killed 210 journalists and directly targeted the press in violation of international law. In 18 months, it's destroyed 90% of the buildings in Rafah. The UN has stated that at least 100 children have been killed or lost a limb every day in Gaza since Israel broke the ceasefire on the 18th of March, which takes to 15,000 the total number of children killed since the 7th of October 2023. The internal situation in Israel reflects all this. The defense budget has increased by 75% in a year. At the same period, social spending has been scaled back, taxes increased, and public debt has reached some 69%. But the deadly Israeli government has allocated 5 billion shekels from coalition fund to its allies. Citizens and politicians have called it the biggest theft in the history of the country. Even the Israeli people have no confidence in their own government. In 2018, 55% of the Israeli population felt that the country was faring well, whereas today that figure is 11%. They're all indicators of the collapse not only of a country but a regime and of an international system that we have built together. Colleagues, each day we see images in the social media that we would have talked about for days had they taken place in any other region of the world a year and a half ago. Funerals of children when we don't even know whose families they are. Babies burned in their tents or where they were sleeping hungry, or children dying of hunger. And the simple fact of getting used to these images extinguishes the conscience of each and every one of us. The children of Gaza are told to be courageous in the face of what they're living through. But I think that counsel of courage is one that they don't need, but rather those who cannot stand up to their assassins would need such counsel of courage. I think what we need to bear in mind is that the life of Palestinian children will be a test for any politician who has a voice in the global political arena, and that is us. Thank you.
Thank you, Seda. Claude Kern is next. Claude.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, President. The situation in Gaza is complicated. That's the least that one can say, I'm afraid. Israeli bombing has resumed, causing new destruction and further deaths. Yesterday, a further Israeli airstrike destroyed a residential building, causing the death of at least 23 people, including 8 women and 8 children. Let us not forget that at the same time, the Israeli hostages are still in captivity. A lasting ceasefire depends on the release of all the hostages held by Hamas, all of them. This cannot be negotiated, and I hope that the current negotiations under the aegis of the United States, Egypt and Qatar will mean that we will be able to achieve a lasting ceasefire. This is all the more important because Israel has imposed a blockade, a humanitarian blockade on the enclave since the 2nd of March. And the UN has said that Israel is not letting any humanitarian aid through to Gaza, Israel, and whereas what Tel Aviv says is that Hamas is diverting the humanitarian aid. Let's be absolutely clear. This terrorist organization is a major obstacle to a final ceasefire in Gaza. We must turn the page and we must establish new governance in the Gaza Strip, which is capable of promoting a sustainable peace without Hamas. The French Republic, Emmanuel Macron, recently announced that France might officially recognize the Palestinian state at an international conference on the two-state solution co-organized with Saudi Arabia. This initiative aims to promote peace in the Middle East and to encourage the mutual recognition between Arab states and Israel. The two-state solution, which we have always supported here, is the best solution, but we mustn't give the impression that this would be a reward for Hamas for its terrorist attacks. This is something that must be done taking into account the protagonists, and we must bear in mind security of the region as a whole. Once peace has come back and real development will be possible, Gaza could indeed become a Riviera in the Middle East. Obviously not with the ambition of satisfying a land grab or acquisitions of certain. We need a shared political project which leads to peace, security and prosperity for the Israelis and for the Palestinians. May I conclude by taking this opportunity to mention the fight against anti-Semitism. Attacks against our Jewish fellow citizens have increased since the 7th of October, and this is not acceptable. We must take more and more initiatives within our member states to ensure that these attacks are roundly condemned, and we must take the necessary steps to ensure the protection of our Jewish fellow citizens. Thank you.
Thank you, Claude. Sam Rushworth is next.
Thank you. It's impossible to speak of Gaza without paying respects to those who lost their lives or were taken hostage in Hamas's genocidal attack on Israel. I've seen the burned out remains of a family home whose occupants were killed that day and stood at the Nova Festival site where beautiful young people were slaughtered, where they gathered to dance. And I've met with brave families of hostages who've continued to campaign for peace. I join their call to bring them home. The return to hostilities makes that less, not more likely. On both sides of this conflict are political leaders who've decided that innocent human lives on the other side of the wall are expendable in pursuit of their aims. In Gaza, those who survived the carpet bombing are at risk of starvation. As reported only today by Reuters, Niama Fajala goes out every day at 6 a.m, trekking with her children across a war zone from soup kitchen to soup kitchen in hope of a bowl of rice. If we don't die of airstrikes, we will die of hunger, she said. When my young son tells me, Mama, I want a glass of milk, my heart breaks. Hamas does need defeating, but the blockade of Gaza is not some unfortunate and unavoidable byproduct of war. It is a strategy of collective punishment. That's not just my opinion. Consider what they say in their own words. Finance Minister Smotrich admitted, he complained that nobody will let us cause 2 million civilians to die of hunger, even though, quote, it might be justified and moral until our hostages are returned. An admission that he views forced starvation as a legitimate strategy for securing the return of hostages. Ben-Gvir, who resigned as National Security Minister in protest at the ceasefire, has been unanimously reappointed by the cabinet. Think about that. A man who opposed the only deal that has led to the return of hostages, reappointed to continue the aggression. I know some of the hostages' families feel betrayed, as their loved ones in Gaza are also put at risk from blocks to humanitarian aid and the IDF bombardments. They fear their loved ones are seen as expendable in a war that was never about bringing them home. So what is the aim? We can only go off what leading figures in the Israeli government say. Deputy Knesset Speaker Nissan Vachuri of Likud wrote on X that Israel's goal is erasing the Gaza Strip from the face of the earth. Meanwhile, Smotrich told a settler group that it is possible to create a situation where Gaza's population will be reduced to half its current size in 2 years, adding it won't cost too much money. He clarified this as referring to voluntary emigration, but people do not just volunteer to become displaced, stateless refugees. Conditions force them towards it. The name for this sort of plan is a matter for legal experts, but what is clear to all of us who believe in human rights is we cannot be passive about what is unfolding. I've sat through too many meetings like this, where one after another we stand up and condemn what we're seeing, and nothing changes. Unless there are actions which are felt, nothing will change. And I finish with the warning recently expressed by the Palestinian lawyer Raji Sarani that Gaza is becoming the graveyard of international law.
Thank you, Sam. Christophe Lacroix.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, President. Colleagues, if I take the floor today, it's not only to talk about a conflict taking place thousands of kilometers away, but it's to recall that behind every figure, every report, every word pronounced here in this chamber, there are human lives, there are children, there are families, there are human beings like you and me, be they Israeli or Palestinian. The abominable attacks of the 7th of October 2023 were a tragic turning point. Since then, the population in Gaza is experiencing unprecedented humanitarian crisis. The truce earlier was a glimmer of hope, where the entry of humanitarian aid, but all that was swept aside, and the war machine of the Israeli government and Netanyahu knocked once again on the door in Gaza. Since the 2nd of March, Gaza is hermetically sealed off. No humanitarian convoys are getting through, no water, no food, no medical care. And 17th and 18th of March, some 400 people killed in one single offensive. Hospitals are not working. Children are dying of malnutrition. It's collective punishment, a flagrant violation of international law. We talk about flagrant violation of international law. When I hear certain things that are said here, I find it cynical indeed, some of the statements I've heard. And unworthy, but they are fallacious. How mendacious? How is it possible to deny what's said by the Secretary General of the UN, denying what's said by journalists on the spot, denying what the ICC has said when issuing an arrest warrant against Netanyahu for supposed war crimes. So you cannot, in the light of that, make revisionist statements here in this chamber, and I say that loud and clearly. And as if the situation in Gaza were not enough, in the West Bank, violence and instability have moved in big time. The civilians living in permanent climate of terror because Israel is continuing with its illegal policy of occupation, increase in settlements, and the violence of settlers encouraged in a climate of total impunity. What are we doing? I ask colleagues. We need to issue the immediate lifting of the humanitarian blockade of Gaza and a ceasefire under international supervision, the protection, the real protection of civilians in Gaza and the West Bank. Recognition of a Palestinian state is not just a political issue. It's a question of coherence and a question of human dignity. Humanitarian law knows no borders. In the face of so much suffering, our silence and our failure to act would be a form of complicity, and culpable complicity at that.
Thank you, Christophe. Nerea Hedo. Nerea, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chairman. I will speak in Spanish. No creo que sea.
I don't think that we need to repeat the clear condemnation of the 7th of October attack by Hamas, nor the clear condemnation of Israelis' disproportionate response, which has caused death and desolation, and which has destroyed hospitals, schools, and homes. We've seen the attacks of journalists and humanitarian workers, and we've heard all the data today. Today, humanitarian cannot get through, but the Palestinians don't have enough medicine or food. This is taking no notice of the appeals of the United Nations. And in addition, about 200 UN officials have been affected. And what is this? What can we actually call this blockade of humanitarian aid? We are calling for a ceasefire and the exchanges of hostages and providing certain aid. But what I can see is that we cannot place a supposed democratic state and a terrorist organization on the same level. But what is happening is that the situation has changed, because the situation has become much more comfortable for Israel because the ICC has pointed out that Israel has criminal responsibility, but Hungary decided not only not to arrest Netanyahu, but to withdraw from the court. And yet we're not saying anything about that. In addition, the United States and Trump, who are completely whitewashing Netanyahu's behavior. And they're saying Gaza would be great for real estate development, and that the Gaza Strip should be taken out and its legitimate inhabitants should be thrown out. And alongside all this, Israel is talking about the voluntary movement of population. Where exactly are they supposed to go? They should stay where their home is, and the only option that they have otherwise is to be refugees. And we need to have an opinion on this, voice an opinion on this. And while a lot of people are remaining silent, Israel is violating international law and international humanitarian law and human rights. And I think that we need to be very careful to make sure that the West Bank doesn't become a second Gaza, because that's a real risk. But at the same time, we've got to require and demand, and not just with words, because we have no resolution today, but we must demand the release of all the hostages, humanitarian aid for Gaza, a permanent ceasefire, and complete respect for the territory of Palestine. And we must make sure that the Palestinians can have the right to live in peace in their own homes. Thank you.
Sophia Amlo is next.
Microphone, please.
Sophia, we cannot hear you. Have you inserted your buds?
Okay. Mr. President, the humanitarian situation in Gaza is beyond everything. We must remember the war is not just about rockets and airstrikes. It's about people, about family struggles to survive in impossible conditions, and about children waking up to the sounds of explosions instead of going to school, who are forced to see things that no one should have to see. And it's about a world that too often turns a blind eye. Israel's war in Gaza continues, and the humanitarian situation worsens daily. Not a single truckload of emergency aid has been allowed into Gaza for over a month, while the food is in the market has running out. Words are no longer enough to describe that is happening in Gaza. We risk soon having a situation with hundreds of thousands of people starving while we watch. More than 500 health workers have been injured. UN staff, journalists, and aid workers are being murdered. It has been discovered that 15 rescue workers have been murdered by Israeli soldiers and then thrown in a mass grave. I urge all institutions, including all governments, to strongly push in the UN and the EU for an emergency ceasefire in Gaza, and demand that the outside world use all available political and economic means to reach it. Mr. President, I stand here in the Council of Europe Assembly and refuse to look away or remain silent. I refuse to face the suffering of the Palestinian people with indifference. I'm a social democrat, and I'm fighting for the peace, for solidarity, and for the equal value of all people is the only way forward. And I can't believe that I need to say this word, but killing of the innocent children must stop now. Thank you.
Thank you, Sophia. Semaletin Kani Torun is next.
Thank you, Mr. President. Dear colleagues, for decades, Israel has targeted the lives, properties, and fundamental freedoms of the Palestinian people in order to achieve its Zionist ambitions over Palestine. However, since October the 7th, these Zionist policies have escalated into one of the largest genocides of the century, with over 50,000 people ruthlessly slaughtered in front of the entire world. The murderous Netanyahu government has shown no hesitation in targeting schools, hospitals, and offices of international organizations. With the killing of more than 20,000 children, a war crime has already been committed. Emboldened by the silence of the world, the Netanyahu government continues to add new massacres of its list every day. While nearly all of the people of the world have called on their governments to take action for Palestine, unfortunately, Zionist lobbies around the world have prevented decisive steps from being taken. Now, I would like to ask the following question to all my colleagues. Despite the support of our people, why have we been unable to stop the greatest massacre of the 21st century? Why have the intergovernmental organizations like United Nations and European Union unable to impose sanctions on the state of Israel? There are two possible answers to this. Either the European states who claim to lead the world are powerless to stop the state of Israel, or Europe, which claims to be the founding entity of universal human rights and insists on never compromising on justice and human rights, when it comes to its own citizens, has chosen to remain silent in the face of this massacre. Dear participants, despite the ceasefire agreement and prisoner exchange, Israel has resumed in its attacks. As stated by United Nations Secretary General Guterres, Gaza has turned into a field of death. We have all witnessed human bodies being blown into the air by bombings. We have all seen how the Red Crescent teams, labeled as terrorists by Israel, were targeted while their sirens were on. Israel is lying to the world, deceiving everyone. There is no access to medical supplies, food, or even water. It is now imperative that we find an urgent solution to this issue. The continuation of this barbarity is the responsibility of all world governments. Those who talk about hostages, don't forget that Israel actually broke the ceasefire agreement and start attack again and stop the prisoner exchange. The recent proposal to evacuate, forced evacuation of Gaza, Gaza should not be acceptable and will remain rejected. We must not allow an occupation plan to be implemented before the eyes of the entire world. I call upon all representatives of member states to take concrete and lasting steps for urgent solution.
Thank you.
Long live Palestine.
Mustafa Kanbey. Mustafa Kanbey is next.
Dear President, distinguished colleagues, I would like to start by expressing our deepest condolences for all the innocent people who have lost their lives in Gaza, especially children, women, and civilians caught in the middle of this tragedy. What we are witnessing is a humanitarian catastrophe. Families have been torn apart. Houses, schools, and hospitals were completely destroyed. The most painful thing is that children, who should have enjoyed a peaceful childhood in their own lands, have lost their lives in indiscriminate and disproportionate attacks by the Israel government. Each child lost is not just a number, but a deep wound in the conscience of the world. The cry of every grieving mother has gone beyond the border of Gaza. These are not merely expressions of sorrow. They are urgent calls for humanity, justice, and international responsibility. As Turkey, we have always emphasized the importance of the value of human rights. Every person, regardless of their geography or identity, is honorable and deserves a life filled with protection and peace. Achieving lasting peace is only possible through a just solution that recognizes the legitimate rights of the Palestinian people. And a true and lasting peace can only be achieved when the legitimate rights of the Palestinian people are fully respected. It is essential that humanitarian aid reaches those in need promptly and without any obstacles. The protection of civilians must be an undisputed priority. When will the international community take united and courageous action? When will it hear the desperate cries of the Palestinians echoing in the sky? In conclusion, I urge everyone us to awaken our conscience. Let us unite our voices in righthouse condemnation of this massacre, which is utterly unacceptable to our moral sense. We must speak for those who cannot express themselves. Ignoring this issue is not an option. Behind every piece of news and every statistic lies a child, a mother, a life that deserves our attention and action. They are people with dreams and have the right to live, just like us. We should all hear their cry. Thank you.
Thank you, Mustafa. The last speaker is Emmanuel Fernandez. Emmanuel, you have the floor.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much, President. 3 weeks ago now, Israel deliberately broke the ceasefire, bombing the Gaza Strip massively. And since then, thousands of inhabitants of Gaza have been killed, children, women, and many, many injured. 50,000 civilians have been killed by Israel in this genocidal war being perpetrated for 18 months in Gaza. These massacres, apart from the embargo on humanitarian aid and the demands on the population to leave the country, is basically a form of ethnic cleansing by Netanyahu with the support of the USA. By breaking the ceasefire, the extreme right Israeli government has shown how little it cares about the hostages in the hands of Hamas, whose families, of course, are asking for the ceasefire to be respected. This is a crisis in terms of international law and humanitarian law, and therefore, as an institution, it is our duty to defend and protect human rights, humanitarian law, and to demand that our states act firmly. In particular, my country, France, which is also a permanent member of the UN Security Council, my country too must act urgently, supporting sanctions and an embargo on weapons deliveries to Israel, stating that it will also implement the decisions of the international judicial bodies, in particular the arrest warrant of the ICC against Netanyahu. And yet, a few days ago, even though France is legally bound to cooperate fully in investigations conducted by the ICC, well, notwithstanding that, Netanyahu was apparently allowed to fly over or through French airspace, even though that would have actually meant a detour, a rerouting. The Netherlands, Iceland, however, were firm. They said that they would stand by their international obligations and would stop the fugitive, hence the change of route. International law shall apply everywhere, whether it's the Near East, whether it's Ukraine, whether it's the Democratic Republic of Congo or elsewhere. But yesterday, the French President, Emmanuel Macron, came out to say that finally it would be prepared to recognize the state of Palestine, most likely in June, in fact. And this morning, the President of the French National Assembly, Yael Braun-Pivet, withdrew her unconditional support to the state of Israel. In France, the pressure that's been exerted now for 18 months by my political movement, France Insoumise, France Unbowed, but also by hundreds of NGOs, associations, and a large part of civil society, and also in particular students. And I would like to pay tribute to them for their mobilization here in Strasbourg, quite specifically. That pressure is now giving us some results. We will never give up. We are fighting for universal human rights. We are fighting also for the release of hostages, for the end to the settlements, and for peace between peoples. Thank you.
Thank you, Emmanuel. Dear colleagues, from our colleague, the first speaker, Mr. Paul Galles, I received the following request. Dear President, on the occasion of this debate, I would like to ask for a minute of silence for all the victims of the horrendous attacks of 7 October 2023 and for the tens of thousands of innocent lives which have been destroyed in the aftermath. I agree with the request and I ask from all the colleagues to stand up for a minute of silence. Thank you. I now call Mr. Galles to reply to the debate. Dear Paul, you have 3 minutes.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much. Thank you, President, and thank you to all those who have spoken in this debate. I've listened very carefully to what each and every one of you had to say, and thank you for the very important elements that you contributed to this debate, which helps us gain a fuller picture. Now, obviously, it's a political issue, an emotional issue, but let me say once again, a number of things that I already set out at the beginning of this debate. Let me reiterate these points, and I hope that I can reiterate them on behalf of this Parliamentary Assembly. The first point that I would like to make is this: we firmly condemn the attacks of October 23. Secondly, once again, we would like to reiterate a call for the return of all hostages safely, and also the return of any bodies, anyone who was killed during their time in captivity. The 4 deceased hostages and the way in which they were handed over at the beginning of the ceasefire, no one can forget those images. Furthermore, we speak out against the systematic destruction of Gaza, its population. Fourthly, we want all those who are responsible for this dramatic situation be accountable and be sent to prison on all sides. Allow me to add one thing. Hamas is not Palestine, and Palestine is not Hamas. Israel is not the government policy, and government policy is not Israel either. It is very complex, much, much more complex than that. What does this mean in reality? Pesach, we want to, of course, wish Happy Pesach to all our Jewish friends, and we do this from the bottom of our hearts, of course. But that does not mean to say that we will stop calling for an immediate ceasefire. The fact that we maybe adopt a political position in favor of Israel, that does not mean to say that we will not want an immediate ceasefire. The fact that we're looking for those responsible at all levels, those who supplied weapons as well, the fact that we're doing that does not mean to say that we will take our eyes off the most important and fundamental needs for which we've called all of us together today. Please, let us have a ceasefire. Let us no longer have a humanitarian blockade, and let us please avoid the deaths of the population of humanitarian workers, journalists, and many, many others besides. Please stop traumatizing young people, children in Gaza, because they are the adults of tomorrow. And please make the conditions right for a proper future for all of us. We see young people here as well today in the gallery, and I wanted to express my agreement with Joseph, who said, what will we say to our children? What will we say to our grandchildren about this situation? What will we say after the event? The Council of Europe is wise, and it therefore decides to disregard political differences, and it decides to call for a human right, the human right to live, to survive. That is what we stand by, and that is why I would reiterate once again, please, please let us have a ceasefire and stop the humanitarian embargo. Thank you. Thank you, President.
Thank you, Paul. Dear colleagues, I remind you that at the end of a current affairs debate, the Assembly is not asked to decide upon a text, but the matter may be referred by the Bureau to the responsible committee for a report. The next item of business this afternoon is a debate on interconnections between the Council of Europe and the European political community. You will find it at a document under the number 16128. The item will be presented by our colleague Mr. Zsolt Nemet, the leader of the European Conservatives, Patriots and Affiliates, on behalf of the Committee on Political Affairs and Democracy. Mr. Nemet, I call you to take the floor when you are ready. In the meantime, I want to inform you that the debate will conclude by 6 p.m. Mr. Nemeth, when you are ready, you can take the floor. You know that you have 7 minutes now and 3 minutes at the end to reply to the debate.
Mr. President, dear colleagues, I am honored to stand before you today to open this debate on the interconnections between the Council of Europe and the European political community. This topic is of paramount importance as we navigate the complex geopolitical landscape of our continent at a critical time. A new European political architecture is just coming into existence, similarly to the changes in 1989. Firstly, let us acknowledge the context in which the European political community was established. In May 2022, President Macron proposed this initiative as a response to the evolving European landscape marked by the war of aggression in Ukraine and new applications for EU-NATO membership. The EPC aims to foster political dialogue and cooperation among European leaders, both from EU and non-EU countries, on an equal footing to address common challenges and strengthen the security, stability, and prosperity of Europe of 46 countries. I want to stress the specific nature of the EPC. The EPC is a non-institutionalized and flexible forum for political coordination and dialogue. It is not another intergovernmental organization, even if some level of institutionalization is discussed. Also, the EPC is a place to discuss geopolitical issues. At the highest level and at regular intervals, twice a year, the leaders of European states seem to enjoy and exploit these opportunities not existing before. Since its inception, the EPC has held 5 summits focusing on critical issues such as peace, security, economic competitivity, prosperity, energy resilience, migration, enlargement of Western structures, and democracy in general. As you will remember, Hungary hosted the last EPC summit on the 7th of November 2024. This summit was a highly successful diplomatic event, the largest actually in Hungarian recent history, as it gathered leaders from over 40 European countries and top representatives of organizations. Non-EU leaders like President Erdogan and Vučić got opportunities to address colleagues on an equal footing. The summit focused on pressing security challenges, including Russia's war in Ukraine, the Middle East conflict, migration issues, and economic security. It highlighted that it was time to restore truth and peace, stop illegal migration, and revitalize the European economy. Since the beginning, the EPC summits have provided a unique platform for high-level dialogue and strategic discussions, complementing existing frameworks without replacing them. Indeed, the EPC doesn't replace neither EU nor the Council of Europe. The Council of Europe, with its 46 member states, is a cornerstone of European multilateralism, dedicated to promoting democracy, human rights, and rule of law. The Council of Europe, in addition, has a key role in the EU enlargement process since 1990, the last major shift in the European political architecture. And let me stress that it is also a political body, a political community, as we are in pace as well. Our assembly is a perfect illustration of that dimension, which should be strengthened and deepened. A European unity is fundamentally needed. A pan-European scope aligns closely with the EPC's geographical reach, highlighting the potential for synergies and cooperation between the two organizations. The participation of the Council of Europe in the last 2 EPC summits in London and Budapest underscores the growing recognition of the need for institutional collaboration. To further strengthen these interconnections, I propose several key actions in the report. First, ensure the Council of Europe's systematic participation in EPC summits to channel its expertise in human rights and democracy. Second, there should be a format for dialogue with the Council of Europe on strategic issues. Also, there should be operational coordination when needed. And finally, the EPC should make full use of Council of Europe expertise and instruments, such as the future Council of Europe Democratic Pact, which I believe can be an extremely central and important collaborating ground between the two organizations. In conclusion, colleagues, the interplay between the Council of Europe, the EU, and the European political community is not about duplication, but about complementarity. European defense capability development, the much discussed defense union in the framework of the European Union is important, but we should not forget about diplomacy either. We shouldn't forget that, for example, 1989, 1990 was preceded not just with the efforts of the United States and Ronald Reagan in the military field, but also the process which started in 1975 in Helsinki, the Helsinki process, which was a fundamentally diplomatic exercise. Today, we should keep in mind that besides the military activity of the Western players in politics should be complemented with a diplomatic activity as well in order to build a successful future political architecture for Europe. By fostering closer ties, we can create a more robust and resilient European architecture, better equipped to face the challenges of our time, to foster dialogue and peace on the continent. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Sol. On behalf of the political groups, I will start with Mr. Norbert Klein-Wächter on behalf of the European Conservatives, Patriots and Affiliates.
Honourable Chair, dear colleagues, dear Mr. Rapporteur, it's a notable detail that Emmanuel Macron, the President of France, suggested the creation of the European political community at the final session of the Conference on the Future of Europe. That conference, which was to serve to integrate the European Union even further, to hand more power to EU bureaucrats and to take away democracy from citizens, led to the insight that this concept doesn't work because the European Union overtaxes, overregulates, and overburdens member states, and especially still independent nations simply do not wish to be overtaxed, to overregulated, or to be overruled. So, interestingly enough, the European political community was created to do about the same things as those that Robert Schuman had envisaged for the European community in the first place, namely economic cooperation, diplomacy, and safety and security in the face of a threat from Russia. The European Union has really developed a way, actually openly denies the values of the European community. And so now this uncommitted structure of cooperation in the European political community has become necessary, even though we still see few to no results. The websites, when you try to look at them, have been shut down and there are no declarations whatsoever. Which leads to the question, do we need another expensive summit where our politicians only fly to just talk? Even if, or especially if, this new community kind of unites the same countries as those that are already in the Council of Europe? And I think the answer is yes. As our country leaders no longer travel to the ministerial meetings of the Council of Europe, as they don't even travel to the EU summits, as we saw in Hungary when they wanted to disapprove of Orban, well, they did come to Budapest for the European Political Community group photo, which is excellent. So, I would like to thank the rapporteur for the excellent work that he has done describing the role of the Council of Europe in the report, and especially in this new construction. Our task is to defend democracy, human rights, and the rule of law. That's what we have to concentrate on. That's where we must not retaliate from. That's where we need to be honest to ourselves. The European Union can deal with economic issues. The European political community can especially deal with the topic of safety and security in the face of the threat from Russia. And we, as a Council of Europe, we can do our homework on the democracy and the rule of law, where there are indeed deficits. When France bans Madame Le Pen from running in the presidential elections, when Poland is to close 2 TV stations, and when in Germany you get jailed for 7 months for just criticizing the government in a satirical ex post, then there's really a lot of work to do. Accession countries to the European Union, which are both organized in the Council of Europe and in the EPC, will only respect the values of democracy if we ourselves respect them. Let's return to that. Thank you.
Thank you, Norbert. On behalf of the Liberal Democrats, Claude Kern. Claude.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much indeed, President. I should like to thank our colleague Jolt Nimet for his draft resolution, which shines a light on the potential links between the Council of Europe and the European political community in order to strengthen the unity of this continent. Let me just perhaps paint the backdrop to the creation of the EPC back in 2022, the initiative of the French President Emmanuel Macron. It was first and foremost a response to Russia's aggression against Ukraine. What it is an informal and flexible outfit which is designed to allow for pan-European dialogue on questions of security in a context which is wider than the European Union. And as our colleague Mr. Nemeth has just pointed out, the Council of Europe and the EPC are actually pursuing different and distinct objectives. The Council of Europe essentially is designed to promote democracy, to protect human rights and guarantee the rule of law in Europe. And it is an institution with a number of bodies as well as formal procedures. On the other hand, the EPC is not there to supplant other institutions, rather is to constitute a platform for a cooperation between heads of state and government, and it does not encompass national parliaments, but is designed to promote cooperation projects in a framework which is wider than that of the European Union. I, for one, feel that both institutions, which are very different in the way they are organized as well as the objectives they pursue, must be mutually complementary. The EPC is a fledgling institution which ought to allow for enhanced cooperation between the member states of the EU on the one hand and with states that are not members on the other, and it can draw on the 75 years of expertise and institutions of the Council of Europe to that end. On the 17th of May 2024, the Committee of Ministers recalled the unique set of instruments available to the Council of Europe to fully support candidates and potential candidates for accession to the EU. And it is important to maintain synergies between the two institutions. And with that in mind, it is vital that future hosts of the EPC's biannual summits continue to invite along the Council of Europe Secretary General. That makes it possible to strengthen dialogue on strategic issues and ensure that the Council of Europe's work, particularly on democratic security issues, are fully incorporated into EPC discussions. Complementarity between ourselves and the EPC is not only possible, but absolutely essential. If we have links and step up our dialogue, we can build a stronger, more resilient and more united Europe, and I therefore intend to support the draft resolution which has been submitted to us today.
Manuel Fernandez.
Thank you very much, President. The creation of the European political community by the French President Emmanuel Macron does give rise to a number of questions. Is it necessary? Is it legitimate? Some of these questions are addressed in the report before the House, but others, I think, should warrant greater examination. If the purpose of the EPC were to discuss economic matters or military cooperation, well, we already have the OSCE. If its purpose was to discuss human rights, democracy and the rule of law, then obviously the Council of Europe is the apposite institution for that. Therefore, it's perfectly legitimate to ask whether it was necessary to create a new space such as the EPC rather than strengthening the structures we already have. The EPC was initiated by Emmanuel Macron within the context of the war of aggression by Russia against Ukraine. But as Mr. Nemat's report rightly underlines, security is a global concept, and to a large extent it is connected to respect for democratic processes, human rights, rule of law, and these are issues that form part of the DNA of the Council of Europe. Incidentally, our Assembly has been working on Ukraine for 3 years now, and the fourth summit of the Council of Europe in Reykjavik, which brought together heads of state and government, also devoted a lot of time to this matter. And therefore, my question once again, why create a new space, this EPC, rather than shoring up what we already have? With my group of the European United Left, we question this. We question the legitimacy of this initiative taken by Mr. Macron. Its substance, I mean, the fact that we are here talking about the possible enlargement of the European Union in a context that is not the European Union, that is puzzling. It really disregards the so-called invaluable role played by the Council of Europe in the process of enlargement, which was highlighted in an EP resolution on institutional relations between the European Union and the Council of Europe, adopted on the 18th of April 2023. Then, as for the form, the EPC doesn't actually have any kind of democratic foundation at all. What I mean by that is that it's completely disconnected from our citizens, and yet we have here a parliamentary assembly and we represent those citizens together. Citizens are not really informed of the existence of the ECP, journalists don't take much of an interest, and the minutes of the summits are difficult to access. And this really raises a problem of transparency. Furthermore, if you look at the membership of the EPC, that too is problematic. Why is it that Monaco, the Principality of Andorra, and the Republic of San Marino, which are 3 member states of the Council of Europe, are not included in the ECP? Why is that? We must make sure that any response to European crises doesn't lead to the multiplication of ad hoc structures, sort of vanity projects whose main purpose is to feed the ego of those who take these initiatives. Let's not yield to President Macron. He's trying to create his own frameworks to resolve some communications issues rather than really responding to a need for cooperation and dialogue. You know, by creating these new frameworks, he's not relying on existing institutions, he's actually weakening the European architecture. We have perfectly good organizations, the UN, the OSCE, the Council of Europe. They are historic organizations. Of course, they can always be improved upon, but their intricate architecture in itself is a guarantor of a respect for the law, for international equilibria, and therefore we call out any parallel arenas such as the G7, G8, G20, or the EPC. Thank you.
On behalf of the Socialist, Green and Democrats.
President Macron's proposal back in 2022 in his capacity as President Office of the Council of the European Union to convene a European political community was and is an ambitious attempt to create a forum for cooperation between European states, and not only those which are members of the EU, but also bringing together the Western Balkans as well as other European nations, and to try and bring together these countries to discuss important political issues such as security, migration, climate change, as well as economic cooperation, is the most ambitious attempt so far to try and promote dialogue between nations, and is a new possibility to try and allay tensions and prevent conflicts. It's particularly positive that Ukraine has been part of those discussions on the security of Europe, and that Turkey has also been in attendance as an important player on our continent, and also by virtue of its geographical location in an area which is decisive for global stability. But it should also be recognized that we need to talk to one another and find compromises and go beyond our initial positions, and this is something the EPC can help countries do. Now, the EPC has huge potential as long as it remains an instrument which deals with those issues which do not belong within the purview of other existing multilateral bodies, and if its decisions are not in contradiction with decisions elsewhere and doesn't duplicate the functions of other organizations. And in terms of the Council of Europe and the EPC, there may be some duplication, and obviously we need to ensure there's no overlap in terms of what it deals with, even if there is an overlap in terms of participants. Secondly, many of the countries part of the EPC are also seeking accession to the EU, and those two pathways should not be confused or certainly membership of the EPC should not be an obstacle to membership of the EU, particularly in the case of the Western Balkans, which applied for membership 10 years ago, and North Macedonia 20 years ago. They should also have a negotiated path to EU membership. And it is more important than ever before that the Western Balkans do become part of the EU. The whole process should be speeded up, and the EPC should not be any obstacle to its membership. And that is why it is important that everything we do should seek to avoid any duplication or any slowing down of these processes. Rather, it should be an instrument for making Europe more incisive, more capable of taking decisions on strategic and delicate issues, and from our perspective, it's also an instrument for beefing up our democratic values, safeguarding human rights and the rule of law, because its effectiveness in the long term will depend on the capacity of members to find common ground, to develop an operational model which is functional, particularly in the Council of Europe.
Dear colleagues, last year I've heard many times many of our European colleagues saying we will make decisions after American elections, after someone else in United States is elected, and then we will try to follow up with our policies. Since recently, I think I don't need to explain why, many European member states became more aware of importance to act independently without any other elections in other parts of the world. Me personally, I've been stressing the importance of European vision and a unity for many years in my work as a parliamentarian, and I'm in Ukrainian parliament almost 6 years. And only recently I see that the real actions actually are taking place. And I'm very happy that political community, European political community, is one of the initiatives that actually provides some institutional strengths to Europe. But I also do share a concern that this organization, this platform, should be a collaboration between different European institutions like us, Council of Europe, that already exist. I'm very happy that in this report we exactly discuss this, because if we're talking about the values of democracies, we need to have Council of Europe as the core in this dialogue. There are many, many dangers and threats to democracies that we discuss here, and I really hope that through more independence of different European member states, through more shared European vision, we can make Europe much stronger. This is very much needed. I don't need to explain why. And it should go also with security measures, with economical measures, and also with cultural measures. We shouldn't ignore culture, as in the end of the day, this is something that shapes all of us and makes us united or no. We should listen to each other and cooperate with different European institutions. And I really hope that in the years to come, we will be stronger and we will have stronger and stronger Europe. We really need that. Thank you.
Thank you, Elisabetta. Dunia Simonovic-Bratic. Elvira Kovacs is here. Isabel Rauch, Vladimir Dordevich, Bernadetta Coma. Bernadetta, you are a solution now.
La mise en place de la communauté politique.
The establishment of the EPC in June 22 at the meeting of the European Council forms part of a new geopolitical context where Europe is facing a number of challenges. In fact, the EPC is a platform, an informal cooperation platform between governments. It's a forum for dialogue by the highest leaders of the countries of the EU and also non-member states of the EU. Right from the outset, there were different opinions on the use of the EPC and the orientation of the EPC and the connection it would have with the Council of Europe, an organisation that actually dates back to the end of the Second World War, which has long-standing political activities. Notwithstanding, the EPC and the Council of Europe don't pursue the same objectives, and nor is the EPC an international organisation. It's not institutionalised. It was created for very specific purposes, and they are not the same as ours. They're in fact complementary to some extent of those of the EU and the Council of Europe. I support the report. I support the draft resolution on the connections between the Council of Europe and the EPC. The head of state of Andorra has taken part in various EPC summits, Moldova, Spain, United Kingdom and Hungary, contrary to what was stated earlier on by Mr. Fernandes. For our country, it is very pleasing indeed, and it's an opportunity to be able to take part in these informal summits and thereby contribute to the defence of our common European values. Why is this forum positive? Because it provides an opportunity to hold bilateral meetings at the highest level. That would not have been possible in other frameworks. It is informal in nature, and that allows the participants to address and move forward on sensitive issues that could not be discussed in institutionalized formats because they would actually lead to a division. It also allows states to forge alliances, synergies throughout the European continent or part of the European continent, and also enables discussions on common challenges and common goals. Furthermore, bearing in mind that the geopolitical situation is changing so quickly, we do need a connection between the Council of Europe and the EPC. That would allow us to have a common front in Europe with all states on board, with all of their problems and issues clearly taken into account. This is a message of unity, a message of cooperation for all of Europe against the backdrop of change. Finally, the Council of Europe should also play a more important role in this domain. It should play a more active role in taking part in discussions regarding the European context and should be there to protect democratic safety in Europe and fight any kind of violation or threat to the rule of law, democracy and human rights. Thank you for your kind attention.
Bernadetta. Armen Gevorkyan. Armen, you have it.
Mr. President, it is the right time to discuss not only the pressures facing democracy, but also the ability of institutions to shape real outcomes in a rapidly changing and conflict-prone world. Since the launch of the European political community, the global situation has become more tense and fragmented. Instead of lasting peace and greater prosperity, we have seen a multiplication of risks, confrontations, and geopolitical shocks. The world has not become more peaceful, and in many places, even friendship has become politically difficult. This reflects a broader concern. Institutions are struggling to manage complexity, support transitions, and most importantly, prevent fragmentations and conflict. As we expand institutional platforms, we must ensure that they are not only inclusive but effective in delivering peace and prosperity. Citizens are right to expect not just structures but substance. The problem is not that Europe lacks institutions, it is that they are no longer shaping positive outcomes as expected. Dear colleagues, there are key expectations for the cooperation we are discussing. First, the most valuable achievement of the Council of Europe remains the pan-European conventional system for the protection of human rights. Halting the erosion of this system and preserving it must remain a strategic mission. Second, it is essential that this cooperation helps reverse the trend of rising authoritarianism across the continent. There is a choice, either to become a principled and determined platform in confronting this trend, or to continue painful compromises that only weaken the democratic world. Third, this kind of cooperation offers a unique and timely format for genuine dialogue among equals, going beyond EU membership status. This inclusive environment enables meaningful participation and mutual recognition. Such dialogue can bring EU candidates closer to membership, and for others, foster a more realistic and engaging vision of the European dream through cooperation, solidarity, and shared values. And fourth, any cooperation must place peace at its center. In a world with a peace deficit, it must be restored through diplomacy, the rule of law, trust, and responsible leadership. And in regions like ours, still facing risk of renewed confrontation, peace must be built also on geopolitical stability, respectful dialogue with neighbors, mutually beneficial regional cooperation, and above all, on working international guarantees and credible national security mechanisms. Mr. President, there is a historic need to continue being architects of peace. And in this regard, I would like to thank the rapporteur for this debate, which is not only a moment of reflections, but also a moment of recommitment. Thank you.
Thank you, Arman. Jose Maria Sanchez Garcia is next. Press only once and wait just for a second.
Ahora. Can you hear me now? Thank you. President, thank you very much. With all due respect to our French colleagues, I don't know. You know, this initiative taken by President Macron, does it really have a European dimension, general interest, or is it more about President Macron, in fact? Is it more about him wanting to play a role that will be remembered, that will go down in history, in Europe's history? I don't know. Quite honestly, I don't know, but I have a lot of question marks, shall we say, taking into account the personality of President Macron. I think it's fairly well known that he did try to reach some agreements on a bilateral basis in connection with the Ukraine war with President Putin of the Russian Federation. He failed in that sense. Also, I know that, well, I can see that he's trying to play a role here as a leader. He wants to lead this procedure regarding the situation in Ukraine after the invasion by Russia, so trying to take the lead on this file. And all of that leads me to have sort of a lack of trust, really. I mistrust the initiative, I must say. I'm not even referring to his most recent idea, namely to set up a European armed force that would, be battle-ready in Ukraine. I don't think that that is going to actually lead to anything in practical terms, notwithstanding the support he might be receiving from the UK, but I think that's pretty much it. Now, we're not against the idea of a European political community, for it to go on and for it to be an informal formation. It's been informal so far. We're not opposed to it continuing that way, but obviously we don't want traditional diplomacy to disappear altogether, and the rapporteur, Mr. Nemet, quite rightly raises this issue in his report. That said, we also understand, and maybe it's an advantage, maybe it's an asset to have this kind of arrangement. It's true that it can be a forum where we listen to nations who usually don't come so close to us, maybe outside of the EU. Some of them are present or continue to be present. Not all of them, but still, there's still many of them are here in the Council of Europe, United Kingdom, Turkey, or Azerbaijan in a somewhat unusual situation, Ukraine, of course, and others who are candidate countries for the European Union. So far, they haven't succeeded down that path, but it brings those together as well. Finally, I wanted to also talk about the strategic aim being pursued by Europe. I mean, initially we had some conversations about military aspects, then it was expanded to other things, but of course that dilutes the initiative. President Trump has reminded his allies that we need to make more of a contribution. Our budgets need to go towards defence. We need to spend more money on defence. So obviously I understand that there needs to be a reaction to that as well. In terms of our military autonomy, how is that possible without the United States of America? What about collective security here in Europe? I want to remind you that President Trump has never said that he would walk away from NATO, nor has he said that, that he thought that NATO had no purpose to serve. Didn't say those things. Anyway, in the light of all of that, and I beg your indulgence for speaking at such length, I would conclude that the EPC does have certain advantages, but nevertheless we remain a little bit sceptical. I think it's important for many of these contradictions to be resolved before we go any further. Thank you.
Dear colleagues, with the speech of Mr. Sanchez Garcia, we have reached the end of the speakers list a bit earlier than expected. I'm going now to ask the rapporteur, Mr. Zsolt Nemet, to reply. Dear Zsolt, you have 3 minutes.
Mr. President and dear colleagues, thank you very much for your contributions. Many of you have underlined the importance of strengthening the European unity. I think that is a very important idea. Madam Jaško underlined this. We are in a moment when there are multiple reasons to take this very seriously and to give a thought to what does it mean for all of us, European unity. Secondly, I would like to underline that when we are building up a European unity, it is very important to treat each other on an equal footing. And those countries who have experienced negative treatment, double standards in the past years, especially by the treatment of Brussels, they have been so inclined to participate in the EPC for the only reason that they have experienced a kind of genuine equality in the framework of EPC. I think we need to understand the message of that. As I mentioned in my speech in Budapest, I've been able to participate at the EPC where enlightening speeches were given by presidents like Mr. Vučić and Mr. Erdogan. Thirdly, I would like to mention that it is equally important to create opportunities for those meetings which otherwise would not happen. There are bilateral relations so tense that they don't even talk to each other, and this process has proved that it has been an extremely opportune format to encourage this type of meeting, not to speak about the existing European tensions which are there. We all know, not just in the Caucasian, but in the Western Balkans and corners surrounding Europe, what kind of relations require very fundamental attention on our side. We all have experienced with different type of reactions the speech of the American Vice President, Mr. G.D. Vance, in Munich. I think that the most important message of the American Vice President was that Europe should pay much more attention to itself, and I think the Council of Europe and with the convention system of the Council of Europe, we are the right organization to do that. Finally, colleagues, I think summits have a very special role in the life of the Council of Europe as well. We have experienced how important it was for us to organize the first summit, and I think it is high time to consider the possibility of organizing the next one. And these summits, according to the experience in the EPC, play a very unique role in creating the identity of European unity, and I believe that the Council of Europe has to give a thought to what kind of content and in what kind of format we are going to organize our next summit. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Mr. Nemet. I will now call the chairperson of the Committee on Political Affairs and Democracy, Mr. Bertrand Buix, to respond if he wants for 3 minutes.
Merci.
Thank you very much, President. Rapporteur, dear colleagues, on behalf of the Political Affairs and Democracy Committee, I should like to thank Mr. Nemeth for all the work that he has done, culminating in his presentation of this excellent report. I'm also grateful to colleagues who took the floor and for making their contribution to this debate, which takes place at a key moment for our continent. Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine has upended the political landscape of our continent, and that is why the creation of a European political community at the initiative of the French president attests to Europe's desire to step up dialogue and cooperation in the face of unprecedented challenges. The fact of the matter is that today, more than ever before, Europe needs to decide itself on its path. And today, more than ever before, Europe has to demonstrate that multilateralism is a living process and it needs a more robust and resilient multilateral approach. Intergovernmental forums such as the EPC, I believe, have a rightful role in that process. We need to maximize their functions and to enhance their complementarity. Now, we have 75 years of experience, and we are the #1 guardian of human rights and the rule of law in Europe. So we should restate forcefully our role and promote it. The Council of Europe is there to strengthen democracy in Europe. We have unique instruments, the most sophisticated anywhere in the world, but at the same time, we must seize this opportunity to develop constructive synergies with the European political community. And our participation at the most recent 2 summits of the organization is a step in the right direction. And we therefore call for the Council of Europe's participation at summits to be routine. We can make a real contribution to the discussions, anything to do with matters which fall within our purview. We can play an active role in discussions on the future architecture of European policies, particularly when it comes to our expertise in democratic security and our support for Ukraine, making sure, amongst other things, that Russia is held accountable. These are trump cards and ones that we should make sure are at the fore. By way of conclusion, no other body can replace the Council of Europe, and we should reaffirm that with conviction, continue our work here at the same time trying to expand fruitful cooperation with the EPC as well as other players on the European stage, most particularly the European Union. So I'd like to thank Mr. Nemeth once again on behalf of the Political Affairs and Democracy Committee, thank him for his excellent job of work, and to thank you all for listening.
Thank you, Mr. Briggs. Dear colleagues, the Committee on Political Affairs and Democracy has presented a draft resolution to which no amendment have been tabled. So we will now proceed to vote on the draft resolution contained in document 16128. I just want to remind you that a simple majority is required. The vote is now open. The vote is closed. I call for the result to be displayed. The draft resolution in document 16128 is obviously adopted. Congratulations. Dear colleagues, the next item of business is the debate on the report titled Strengthening Relations between the Council of Europe and Latin America. The document has a number 16129, and it is presented by Mr. Antonio Gutierrez Limones on behalf of the Committee on Political Affairs and Democracy. We will also have later an online statement by Mr. Gerardo Fernandez Norona, President of the Senate of Mexico. This debate will conclude by 8 p.m. to allow time for the reply and the vote. I now call Mr. Gutierrez Limones, the rapporteur, if he's ready, to take the floor. Dear Antonio, you have 7 minutes now and 3 minutes to the end of the debate to reply. Whenever you're ready, you can take the floor. We cannot hear you. Can you press the button?
Okay, now, dear President, thank you. I'm going to speak in Spanish.
First and foremost, allow me to extend thanks to the online presence of the President of the Mexican Senate, Gerardo Rodolfo Fernandez Noroña. I also wish to underscore the very key role played by Mexico here for more than 25 years through relations between the Council of Europe and this Assembly. Europe and Latin America share 5 centuries of history. It's a history of languages, cultures, traditions, common ideas. Furthermore, it is a history that has been marked by migration, population fusion, trade routes, close political relations across the Atlantic Ocean. Europe and Latin America, furthermore, share the same values as the ones that the Council of Europe has been defending since 1949, the universal nature of human rights, the indispensable nature of democracy, as well as the primacy of the rule of law which must prevail over force. These links are absolutely essential, particularly as we face dramatic changes, geopolitically speaking, and global challenges. The ones we're facing right now, for instance, threats to security, threats to global peace, the environmental crisis, climate change, also growing inequalities in socio-economic terms, the development of new technologies and artificial intelligence. It is precisely because we start off from this base or bedrock of common values that we are able to develop our resilience and develop robust democracies in our regions. This is the biggest challenge for the 21st century, and Latin America is quite clearly the natural ally of Europe here. In order to achieve this, we need political dialogue, parliamentary diplomacy. Over and beyond any kind of ideological differences and national interests, we will need these tools in order to build mechanisms for effective communication between bodies and between countries in both regions. And in that sense, the Council of Europe really has a privileged position. It can strengthen these links of cooperation between the continent of Europe and the continent of Latin America. The organization, in fact, institutionalized these relations, establishing contacts with other bodies and other regional institutions in Latin America. For instance, in 2011, we signed a Memorandum of Understanding with the Organization of American States, the OAS, and these last few years we've also been developing dialogue and cooperation activities with the Ibero-American System as well as its sectoral organizations. Furthermore, the European Court of Human Rights, together with the Inter-American Court of Human Rights and the African Court of Human and People's Rights, together adopted the Declaration of San Jose in 2018, thereby establishing a permanent forum for institutional dialogue. Furthermore, we also have the Venice Commission. The Venice Commission has a fundamental role to play. Since 2002, Brazil, Chile, Costa Rica, Peru have joined the Venice Commission and are fully fledged members. Argentina and Uruguay are currently observer states. In 2008, our Assembly signed an agreement of cooperation between the Palatinos of the Latin American and Caribbean Parliament and ourselves. There was a debate, and there will be a vote today, and it's an opportunity for us to really kickstart this agreement. In December of last year, I visited the Parlatino. I took part in its 38th ordinary session, and it was a great honour to be able to address the plenary session and to meet with the President, the Secretary General of the Parlatino, and also parliamentarians from many different countries of the region. All of them confirmed that they were very much interested in turning to this agreement, and they all emphasise the importance of having relations between these two assemblies that will help us strengthen our democratic institutions on both continents. That mission was a first step in the right direction. We all need to move forward together, and therefore I would like to seek active participation with the representation of the APCE and Parlatino at a number of plenary meetings, at whatever regularity you deem is advisable in order to foster our relations, also between committees who have common interests. But it's not just about international organisations. The Council of Europe also has bilateral relations with a number of Latin American countries. As I indicated already, since 1999, Mexico has been an observer state with the Council of Europe, and our Parliamentary Assembly is very blessed to have its very valuable contribution and participation in this assembly. It strengthens our ties, and it also means that Mexico can act as an ambassador of the Council of Europe in the region of Latin America. That could be an inspiration for other countries, for their national assemblies, and perhaps they too would like to join us in our values. We need to strengthen these bilateral relations with the countries of Latin America, bring them closer to the work that is being done by the different bodies of the Council of Europe, allowing them to participate in enlarged partial agreements of our organization, because these enlarged partial agreements are open to non-member states, and therefore I would like to extend an invitation to all of them to do so. Furthermore, this assembly, based on the Reykjavik Declaration, should also invite the Committee of Ministers to continue to strengthen the relations between the Council of Europe and multilateral organizations in Latin America. In particular, here I would mention the Organization of American States, and I would mention the Ibero-American system. We should have high-level meetings, sectoral meetings. We could have technical cooperation activities. We could also exchange knowledge and organize events together. All this to pursue multilateralism and promote international law, protect also human rights, combat the backsliding of our democracies, and also promoting the principles of the rule of law. I also wanted to make it clear to you that I tried to draft my report in as balanced a way as possible. I analysed the various international organisations, I analysed the different countries of the region with which the Council of Europe has relations, and I also looked at the potential when it comes to strengthening these relations. Now, at this stage, to add to the resolution a number of points that refer to the political situation in specific Latin American countries, bearing in mind that that particular situation has not been analysed exhaustively in the explanatory memorandum. To do so now would actually be to change the very nature of my report, and it would be unnecessarily complicated, and it would also, I think, go against its very logic. That said, I would like to thank all those who have submitted comments to my report. Thank you also for the amendments. But I think that these issues concerning specific countries could more usefully be dealt with in joint meetings with parliamentary representatives of those countries, and maybe we could organise this with the help of the Palatino soon. I come to my conclusion. The region of Latin America is essential for the attraction of the Council of Europe, for its outreach to countries beyond the borders of the European continent. Today, more than ever, we need to be partners. We need to share a vision, and we need to devote ourselves to the protection of democracy, human rights, and the rule of law. Thank you.
Thank you, Antonio. Dear colleagues, I open now the list on behalf of political groups, and I call first the co-chair of the United European Left, Mrs. Laura Castel. Laura.
Gracias, presidente.
Thank you very much indeed, President. First of all, I should like to congratulate our rapporteur, Antonio. This is a very important item that you have managed to get onto the agenda of the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe. Now, obviously, there are links between Latin America and Europe which find expression in our values and shared interests. It is important and positive that we develop those links, particularly in the dark times in which we live, and we're seeing autocracies on the rise, as well as illiberal regimes, as well as threats to democracies, show that we need that kind of cooperation more than ever before between countries that share the same values. And that is why we endorse the resolution recommendation contained in the report, and also take the opportunity to say to the President of this Assembly that he should formalize invitations to the President of Mexico, as well as to President Lula da Silva, to take part in the next part session of this Assembly to try and strengthen relations between our different bodies. Now, we have had our invited guests here for over 25 years, and we now find ourselves at a time in which extraordinary historical changes are taking place on the cultural and economic fronts, as well as in terms of feminism. And that is why we would like to commend Mexico on formalizing its accession to the Istanbul Convention, one that is open to all states, even those outside the Council of of Europe, and Mexico really is the launch pad. It is out there in the vanguard amongst all our brothers and sisters in Latin America, and it is truly inspirational for all of us. I think that at a time at which multilateral and diplomatic forums are under threat, and we have illiberal forces which are threatening them, precisely the time in which we should be strengthening our international relations to try and resolve conflicts. And what is more, I would suggest that the Assembly also explore other ways of expanding these kinds of instruments to other parts of the world, and perhaps reach out to CELAC, which is the 33-member organization bringing together countries of Latin America and the Caribbean. Once again, Antonio, many thanks.
Dear Laura, and of course, thanks for your proposal, and you know that I will consider it. I'm really glad that the Speaker of the Mexican Parliament has accepted not only to speak to us together, but to be with us 3 weeks ago in the Speakers' Conference, and he addressed the Speakers' Conference. So we're creating and we are improving the relations. Since you are a member of the Presidential Committee, I will be waiting for your concrete proposals. Now, I give the floor to Luz Martinez-Seizo from the Socialists, Greens and Democrats.
Thank you very much. Thank you, President. We are discussing here the strengthening of relations between the Council of Europe and Latin America. It's so essential. We live in an interconnected world, and that's why it's so important for us to strengthen our links with those regions that share our fundamental values: human rights, democracy, and the rule of law. Therefore, my political group supports you fully, Mr. Gutierrez. Europe and Latin America have a shared history, more than 5 centuries, and this history really has shaped our culture, politics, and we've had so many exchanges of ideas, traditions, and so on and so forth. And there are countries and organizations in Latin America that share our fundamental values, those that are at the core of the Council of Europe: the universal nature of human rights, the absolutely essential nature of democracy, as well as the primacy of the rule of law, which must prevail over the law of the mighty. In addition to that, we have bilateral relations with a number of Latin American countries. Mexico, in particular, has been granted observer status for 25 years now in the Council of Europe and has been instrumental in promoting the values of the Council of Europe. In the current geopolitical situation, our links between Europe and Latin America are particularly important and relevant. International law is in peril, and therefore we need to come up with an international joint response to these threats, and we need to base that on multilateralism and cooperation. I would refer here to geopolitical conflicts. I would refer to threats to international security, to climate change, as well as environmental deterioration, the energy transition, problems in terms of our commodities, the health and the use of artificial intelligence, and so on and so forth. And for all of these reasons, we need alliances in order to face these economic threats and also bellicose threats that we've seen emerging. We've seen also the actions undertaken by the United States of America and Russia. The European continent is trying to help shore up the competitiveness of its companies, particularly in the EU, and that means making sure that we improve education, ongoing training and jobs. But it's a new situation, and it is why we really need to shape a different international order based on new rules, and that's precisely why we need to strengthen our relations with relevant multilateral institutions in Latin America, the OAS and the Ibero-American system in particular, sectoral agreements, technical cooperation agreements, exchange of experience, common projects, etc. We need to also promote human rights. We need to stop the backsliding of democracy. We need to promote the principles of the rule of law. And also we need to deal with the issue of pollution, climate change, threats to biodiversity. In sum, we need to promote the standards of the Council of Europe. And for that, we need to promote the accession of other countries to our conventions and those agreements that are open to non-member states of the Council of Europe. Today, more than ever, we need to do more work with regions that share our values, and Latin America is definitely an ally for us in that sense. Thank you.
Georgios Stamatis, on behalf of the European People's Party, is next.
Thank you, Mr. President. Unfortunately, I don't know to speak Spanish, but I would like to congratulate Antonio for a very good job, because from this report he gave us the opportunity here to the Council of Europe to see the future, to see our future, and of course to see the future with cooperation with other countries, not only with Latin America. This report is a roadmap, and for the other relations, for the countries for East Asia, in Central Asia, and African countries. And this is very good for our values, for our democracy, especially in this period, because all we know what happened in the world. Dear colleagues, Europe and Latin America, they are rooted in five centuries of shared history, cultural exchange, and many same things in our culture. But even more importantly, we are bound today by common values that are heart of the Council of Europe: the universality of human rights and the nature of democracy. In time like this, when democracy backlights in many parts of the world, and then global changes, as colleagues say, climate change, AI, migrations, health issue, pandemics, we need solutions and we need cooperations. All we know what happened in Latin America some decades before, dictatorships and not democracy. And now we have these countries to fight for democracy, to claim in us, like Mexico, in our values. And I think on behalf of European EPP, we have to encourage for more cooperation. We believe in this report, and I think it's the future. Because if we don't cooperate with countries from Latin America, as observer of Mexico, it's very difficult to understand each other for the new challenges. And with the new challenges, not only the pandemic about migration or refugees, but the economical war. But in the heart of all this is democracy, democracy and democracy. And I think in this cooperation with this report with Latin America, our values are more strength to the people of Latin America. I would like once again to congratulate Antonio. Antonio is a great colleague, belongs to Socialists, and from this report show us not only the roadmap about the cooperation, show us the future of our relations. We are in the heart of the Europe, we are in Europe, but Europe cannot be to the next step in the century without cooperations with the countries of Latin America, because we have the same history, language, philosophy, and democracy. And I think it's a very good opportunity, your President, in your days, to open the Council of Europe in more countries in the world. Thank you.
Thank you, George. Markus Wiesel on behalf of the European Conservatives, Patriots and Affiliates.
It's an honor for me to address you on behalf of my group on the highly topical subject of Council of Europe, Latin American relations and our joint wish to see them strengthened further. In doing so, we have a long shared history on which we build, as our rapporteur points out in his report. To this should be added our linguistically and culturally connected two countries in the form of Spanish and Portuguese, which never ceases to add dynamism and contacts across the Atlantic. We currently witness a critical juncture in Latin America, a region with profound ties to our world, rich in culture and potential, yet currently facing significant challenges that demand our immediate attention and action. In the heart of this discussion is the alarming situation in countries such as Venezuela, Nicaragua, and Cuba, who have all suffered severely from totalitarian socialism. These countries, once hopeful with dreams for a prosperous and democratic future, are now mired in political and economic crises that threaten the very principles of democracy and freedom. Venezuela, once one of the most prosperous nations in Latin America, is now grappling with a devastating economic collapse, food shortages, and severe political repression. Millions have fled the country, creating one of the largest migration crises in the world. In Nicaragua, democratic institutions are under siege. The government has intensified its repressive measures against the opposition and civil society, stifling the voices of those who seek change. Meanwhile, in Cuba, Despite claims of political reform, the regime continues and even increases to curtail freedoms, suppressing dissidents and impeding the hopes for democratic transition. While speaking about Cuba, I must add that it is, to say the least, hypocrisy as Europeans claiming to support the PDCA agreement between the European Union and Cuba, and at the same time claim to support democracy and fundamental freedoms and human rights. But that is a completely different story. What we must also raise is a growing Chinese influence in this region. Through strategic investments and political engagement, China has increased its foothold, at times sidelining the democratic aspirations of the people. China's involvement in infrastructure and economic development raises questions about the long-term implications. The Western world, anchored in democratic values and human rights, cannot remain passive. We must step up our diplomatic, economic, and humanitarian efforts to support Latin American nations in safeguarding their autonomy and democratic process. This means fostering stronger ties, promoting transparent investments, and ensuring that international support aligns with the aspirations of the people for freedom and democracy. In conclusion, there are, of course, a couple of good examples of what could be achieved, and I must raise two of these. Firstly, the progress made in the fight against crime in El Salvador. Thanks to radical measures against the gangs, the number of murders in the country decreased with 50%. And the other is Argentina. Of course, I'm speaking about the government who achieved what many considered a miracle in terms of cutting down inflation and stabilizing the economy. Thank you, Mr. President.
Baroness Hall Brinton, on behalf of the Liberal Democrats.
Mr. President, Europe's historic relationship with Latin America means we share many common bonds, cultural, economic, as well as political. And I should state that I'm the chair of the Human Rights Committee at Liberal International. And last December, we met up with our Liberal Democrat sister parties from across Latin America at our Global Congress in Chile. They reinforced to us the strength of those ties too, urging ALDE member parties to help develop and encourage stronger links on key values such as human rights. Our Venezuelan colleagues told us in Santiago of how Maduro stole the election from Edmundo González, has banned our sister Maria Corina Machado and others from standing, is imprisoning others, and some politicians are now disappearing. They are a shining example of standing up for democracy. Dear friends, this resolution understandably focuses on the present time and recent past, but I think we should also remind ourselves of a longer historical relationship. In Great Britain in 1826, George Canning, then Foreign Secretary, as the independence moves first developed in Latin America, called those new democracies the new world called into existence to redress the balance of the old. And it wasn't just in Britain. From across historic and cultural relationships across Europe, trading patterns developed, people with particular skills and interests moved to Latin America, and businesses traded in both directions. One area of that is energy. Many European energy businesses have interests in Latin America, with the mining of fossil fuels now beginning to be replaced with renewable energies, and Argentina, Brazil, and Mexico are leading the way. Solar and wind power is a game changer. We should develop stronger links in these areas because we need to learn from these countries how to install them at volume and at pace, saving money, reducing carbon consumption and pollution. Our Latin American colleagues did raise a note of caution, though. China is South America's top trading partner and is investing extremely large amounts of money and infrastructure through its Belt and Road Initiative, which is changing the soft power dynamics. China is funding and assisting the building of a new railway system in Chile and wants to open a Chinese subsidiary port in the deep south of Argentina. President Trump's actions over the last few weeks have, I believe, reset the rest of the world's attitudes about global relations and values and trust. We are now being handed an opportunity to work together to the benefit of us all in a new world. We should support Mr. Guterres Limones' report, the agreements and actions in the resolution, increase activity in social, cultural, and business activities, and move swiftly to make it a reality.
Thank you, Baroness Brinton. Dear colleagues, We will now be connected with the President of the Senate of Mexico, Mr. Gerardo Fernandez Norona, whom I welcome once again, dear Gerardo, in this assembly, though from distance this time. And we are waiting for your speech. We would like you to address now to our assembly. You have the floor.
Thank you very much indeed, President. Thank you to the Council of Europe. Thank you, Mr. Rossopoulos. Thank you for your kind invitation to address the Council of Europe. It is a great honor for me and a privilege. I would have liked to have been there in person. I would have liked to have done this face-to-face, but I was there recently at the meeting of presidents of parliaments. I was in Strasbourg. I was in the Council of Europe very recently indeed. Yesterday, our president, Claudia Sheinbaum Pardo, had a meeting with the Community of Latin American and Caribbean States, the CELAC. She gave an address, and it was an extraordinary address. And I actually thought that it was very much in sync with the topics that the Council of Europe is addressing today. And therefore, if I may, I would like to refer to 3 paragraphs from her speech. I invite CELAC, the Community of Caribbean and Latin American States, to attend a summit for economic well-being in Latin America and in the Caribbean region in order to facilitate better integration in the region based on shared prosperity and based on respect for our sovereignty. That's the first citation I wanted to share with you because I think it's very important, and it's very important for everyone to hear this. European Union, China, Russia, everywhere around the world. We need to have economic integration and we need to have prosperity. That is what we want to bring our populations. We want to have, of course, also respect for our sovereignty. Furthermore, as I stated earlier in my intervention, the President of Mexico really has taken the lead on a number of issues. She is against racism, classism, violations of human rights, and the criminalization of our brothers and sisters from our continent who, for whatever reason, have had to migrate to the north of the continent. Furthermore, there is a clear statement rejecting sanctions and commercial embargoes that actually damage the well-being of peoples. They do not allow us to construct peace or indeed further development. Therefore, a no to the embargo on Cuba or on Venezuela. I think that that statement too is very important. In our relations with Europe, it's very important to understand what our peoples are going through and what our nations are going through. There is stigmatization, for instance, vis-à-vis the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela. You should remember that there were 74 years of absolutely intolerable regime in that country. And very often, people said that this was about human rights, about democratic processes, but it was used as a pretext, as an excuse in order to interfere with processes that are proper to our own nations and to our own peoples. Mexico, and this wasn't so much the Council of Europe, but rather the European Parliament that also turned to us and criticized us for a legislation that we adopted at the time. We were trying to put some order into private investment, foreign investment in particular. And at the time, the European Parliament raised its concerns. They alleged that these were breaches of human rights. They also talked about journalists in Mexico and their situation. And it's true that the situation is worrying. But I think it's important to perhaps recall what happened subsequently and the way in which we have tackled security matters. And I think when things go well, they forget to inform the rest of the world. So let me rephrase this. We should have a relationship based on respect, on reciprocity, on neighborhood. Also making sure that the principles that we share apply in all circumstances and under all situations. For instance, the 15 individuals who were assassinated, paramedics, Palestinian paramedics, assassinated recently, by the State of Israel, and the humanity as a whole should really call this out. Unfortunately, this is not what has happened. There seems to be a certain amount of silence surrounding that. I don't know what the Council of Europe has done with regard to this particular incident, whether there's been any kind of discussion about this, or indeed the European Parliament. But with that as a backdrop, allow me to make a humble suggestion. The document that you're currently discussing here in the plenary, and also, of course, referring back to the statement of our President, Claudia Sheinbaum-Pardo, I think they are completely in sync. We agree on rule of law, environment, human rights, equality, development of humanity, and we would also include in that the fight against homophobia, racism, classism, etc., etc. We completely agree on those principles. You're here talking about relations with the Organization of American States, quite rightly so, and I think it's important for us, however, nevertheless, to point out that the OAS has sometimes been instrumentalized, for instance, by the government of the United States of America. Unfortunately, there's been some instrumentalization. So I think you need to be cautious, go forward cautiously. I think you need to think carefully about the need to establish such ongoing relations with this particular organization. I think it would be better to have a deep exchange on topics that we share, concerns that we share. I think that there are other ways of organizing this communication and this dialogue. I think we could be very effective, and we could also work for the mutual benefit of both sides. So right now there is concern around the world regarding, for instance, trade tariffs imposed by the United States of America vis-à-vis Europe. I know that there's now been a pause for 90 days. I don't know whether that holds true for Europe as well, but that there is basically a trade war unfolding between the United States of America and China, with 84% tariffs and so on and so forth, reciprocity. And this can have a very negative impact on our peoples and on our economies. We are convinced that a dialogue would be better, communication would be better, cooperation would be preferable to this. You know, I don't think that there is a need for this fight. I mean, if the United States need to have some kind of fight, I don't think they need to, you know, point us out as antagonists. I don't think that that is necessary. Rather than doing that, let us have respect for our independence, for our sovereignty. Let us have respect, and let us instead move together. Let us focus on the human being. Let us focus on harmony, our coexistence with this planet in harmony. These would be some of my reflections that I wanted to share with you on this occasion. And once again, allow me to extend my deepest and warmest thanks for your kind invitation. It has been a great opportunity for me to share these thoughts with you, to share our vision, and to share also our commitment. Right now in April, 106 days since the assassination of a great Mexican revolutionary, Emiliano Zapata, who fought for the most vulnerable, the poorest. He wanted land, he wanted liberty. That was his slogan, and we mark that anniversary now. Well, with that as a historic background, I wish the Council of Europe a long and successful future. I know that this organization is very humanist, and it's also an organization that stands by in friendship with our peoples, with our nations. Thank you for that. Thank you for also listening to me, and I send you the warmest greetings from Mexico City. Thank you very much for your kind attention. Thank you.
The Senate of Mexico, dear Gerardo, thank you so much. Thank you for your warm speech that rightly pointed out the relationship should be based on respect. Dear colleagues, we go on now with our colleague Francesco Verducci. Francesco, you have the floor.
Grazie, Presidente.
Thank you very much indeed, President, colleagues. First of all, I should like to thank our rapporteur, Antonio Gutierrez, for having brought into being this resolution, and then also my gratitude goes to the Speaker of the Mexican Senate, who did us the honor of participating. And from my own point of view, first and foremost, he's given a political value to what we're trying to do. Now, there is an inextricable link between the crises of democracy and crises of multilateralism. We have sovereignist, nationalistic, populist forces who are seeking to overturn our democratic achievements, exactly the same forces which wish to roll back multilateralism. And we have to affirm and demonstrate that the crises in democracy require more democracy and not less democracy. We have to renew democracy and not betray the clamoring for emancipation which is coming from society at large and from the younger generations. And at the same time, faced with these crises in multilateralism, the only solution can be more multilateralism. We have to have just and fair globalization, and we therefore have to strengthen the relationship with the Council of Europe and Latin America. And we have therefore to correct some of the distortions in globalization of recent decades. And in doing so, we can bring the Council of Europe and Latin America closer to one another, in the process shoring up democracy and multilateralism at this turning point in our history, in which we have nationalism and trade barriers, cultural barriers, which are actually leading to war. Now, cooperation and dialogue are the right way to create the conditions for peace. And we mustn't forget that we must not then turn our backs on our achievements of the past and make sure that multilateralism is returned to center stage. And this is our watchword of our policies, and that it is the way in which we re-engage and re-motivate people. President, it's important that we use the instruments of parliamentary diplomacy available to us, and also not forget the relationships in the Interparliamentary Union between Italy and Mexico, which have enabled us to forge indissoluble relationships, and which are a sign of the deep relationship between our peoples and our continent. Europe and Latin America share the universal values of the fight against inequality, the fight against discrimination, a spirit of inclusivity and solidarity. We need to learn from our mistakes in the past and not allow a situation in which the world hurtles into destructive, unbridled and authoritarian backsliding. Thank you.
Monsieur Robles, vous avez la parole.
Thank you very much. Mr. Robles. Thank you, Madam President. First of all, I would like to underline just how timely and important this report is. It gives us the opportunity to enter into debate to address a whole series of important matters pertaining to intercontinental relations, linking partners on both sides of the Atlantic. In the past, there have been relations between the Council and the Assembly and our counterparts, but this report opens a new chapter. It actually gives us the opportunity now to organise an agenda based on agreement on both sides, addressing some of our, or all of our shared concerns. As we've heard, and I repeat it, whenever you travel to Latin America, you realise how much we have in common, both in terms of language as well as culture and traditions. Lots of things unite us. At the same time, however, we're also aware of the enormous problems we share on the international front. We've heard the representative from Mexico turning, and we're aware of the problems which Mexico faces in terms of immigration. This week in the Council of Europe, we've been talking a lot about immigration. We've also been talking about issues pertaining, for example, to foreign interference in elections. So those things also happen over there as well as here, so we can share what we've learned. Facing these shared problems, we have shared concerns, and we also have shared values. And the most important thing for us is to continue on the path of cooperation. We are currently facing a stage in history where lots of people are erecting walls, including some of our long-standing friends and allies. Think people with whom we shared a lot. And suddenly we find ourselves wondering what's going on in their head. And I don't think that the solution is to ignore people, to put up walls, to divide each other. So I was a member of the Spanish government for many years, and I was actively involved in the fight against drug trafficking. Clearly, that's very important in terms of what's happening on the other side of the Atlantic. We have to cooperate with Mexico, with Colombia, and so on. And here in the Council, we have a group working specifically on the whole question of drugs, the Pompidou Group. And they're aware of just how important cooperation with Latin America is. So what we should be doing is not moving towards more nationalism, more navel gazing. We should be moving towards a recognition of the need to have a shared approach, and that's what the report says. The report stresses that however big Europe might be, the world's much bigger. Everything has an international dimension. We saw this with a pandemic, we've seen it with immigration, with drug trafficking, foreign interference in elections. So what we have to do is cooperate, talk to each other, work together, create links. And it's important we have debates such as this recommendation will go to the Committee of Ministers and will provide the basis, I hope, for a structured dialogue, a structured agenda for our work and contacts with Latin America. And of course, I'd like to congratulate Antonio for this excellent report he's put to us this afternoon. Many thanks. Thank you, Mr. Ramirez.
Monsieur Ramirez, vous avez la parole.
I repeat, Mr. Ramirez. Good afternoon, Madam President, honourable members. It's a great honour for me to be able to address you this afternoon regarding the need to strengthen links between Latin America and Europe. These are two world regions which are linked by a shared history, common democratic values, and a shared vision of a more equitable, more peaceful world. I would like to thank our colleague, Mr. Antonio Gutierrez, for the report he's presented today. Today's world is overshadowed by polarization, threatening and undermining our institutions. It's more important than ever that we cooperate. We have to work together to defend democracy, access to justice, and to work to consolidate transparent and efficient institutions. We have to ensure that democracy enables us to have strong states, ensuring that we can have access to democracy and the rule of law. We have to have a system of checks and balances. We have to ensure that the way in which the government operates, the economy or social welfare, can operate effectively without one single party or ideology taking over. The threats of violence committed by criminal groups in our own country is something which is very relevant when it comes to the role of the judiciary in the different parts of our country. One of the fundamental pillars of democratic life is the judiciary. Throughout the world, it's essential that we have independent judiciaries. In Mexico, we have elections for judges, magistrates, and ministers, and that's been subject to recent reform under real time pressure. The aim is not yet fully efficient. What's important is to ensure that we have a strong judiciary underpinning the rule of law and avoiding any excessive intervention by the state or interest groups at the present time, because of the increasing power of groups whose interests aren't the same as our citizens. We see this under threat. This is an area in which the experience of the Council of Europe, which has always been powerful in its defence of the judiciary, can act as an essential reference for us. Cooperation in this area, in which we can observe and learn from this friendly organisation, can enable us to further improve our own institutions, thereby guaranteeing access to justice for all our citizens. On the other hand, we can't turn a blind eye to the humanitarian crisis, which since 18th of March 2005, more than 60,000 people have disappeared in our country, according to official figures. The families and their loved ones still seek justice, and this is an ongoing issue. Inter-American mechanisms for human rights, as well as effective systems of reparation, will be important if we're to find solutions. Thanks to its own recent history, Europe, as the President interrupts, has shown that citizens can indeed work together to build a life of peace. In this context, ongoing dialogue between Latin America and the Council of Europe is not just an opportunity, it's also a necessity. We share values. I'm winding up, President. We share values, we share challenges. Above all, however, we share the deep conviction that cooperation and dialogue bring us closer together. The President interrupts again. They bring us together, they bring us closer, thereby enabling us to improve the lives of our citizens. Thank you. Thank you, Madam President. First of all, I'd like to thank Antonio for his excellent report. Congratulations. The proposal, the draft resolution, starts by saying that Europe and Latin America share multilateral, multidimensional links. That's quite true. We have, however, difficult times where we've moved closer, further away from Latin America, depending on the historical phase we're in, the priorities of both sides, or the leadership in place in the different countries. However, we believe that our relationship must become much closer. It's important that we step up cooperation and to forge stronger links. There are principles, values, shared interests which provide the basis for closer economic, social, and cultural links, links which are rooted in the defense of human rights, fundamental values, democracy, peace, cooperation, and social justice. Without forgetting, of course, the importance of climate change, water resources, or indigenous issues, something which hasn't been mentioned so far. I don't think we can afford to forget either that our relationship with Latin America is of essential importance for all our friends and fellow residents from Latin America and Europe. So the Basque diaspora, for example, started settling the other side of the Atlantic as early as the 15th or 14th century. Over the years, we had ever closer economic links, and those links later extended to much of Latin America and the United States. I think it's very important that we strengthen our alliances, as is underlined in the resolution, with multilateral cooperation, Par Latina, the OAS, as well as the Inter-American Court for Human Rights. This is even more important at the present time, where we've seen such a fundamental change in the nature of human relations since the new President of the United States took over. So I sincerely hope that our relationship, our cooperation, our alliances will remain strong. And we should never forget the important role which is played by sub-state bodies, in other words, local and regional authorities. I would like to wind up just by thanking Antonio once again for this really excellent report.
Monsieur Griffiths, vous avez la parole.
Mr. Griffiths.
Thank you, Madam President, and let me express my delight at the fact that this dimension, the relationship with Latin America, is being explored in this debate, since I lived for quite a lot of my life in the Caribbean and have traveled through Latin America. I'm also delighted to have the head of the Senate actually speak to us, a Mexican voice, when we speak about Latin America, and our friend back there too. I hope that everybody in this chamber will continue, when they open their atlases, to see the Gulf of Mexico rather than the Gulf of America. So let's hope for that. We can do that with pleasure. I want to use the short time at my disposal to make a plea. The languages of Latin America are not just Spanish. It's been good to hear Spanish-speaking people in this debate, or even Portuguese. English, yes, but also French. And Haiti, which is the country of my first love, is bang in the middle and ignored by everybody. And I have to say, too, that in 1991, and I was so pleased that the head of the Senate mentioned this, the Organization of American States played a disastrous, bad, foul-mouthed relationship with the only democratically elected president of Haiti in living memory. Jean-Bertrand Aristide was ousted from office after 6 months in office, and after all the OAS countries in Chile had promised that if there was a military junta replacing a democratically elected government in any one of their countries, they'd come to help. They did nothing. Instrumentalized by the United States, that's what the President of the Senate said, and therefore I would urge people to have a critical relationship with the bodies who represent Latin America. The OAS, more than once, has shown that it is at the disposal of those further north. So Haiti, which is in a total mess at the moment, where I'm working quite hard to try to get one or two things to happen, needs the support of the Council of Europe. And of course, I've never had a chance to say that until this debate. But it would be so good, especially since one of our number, namely France, imposed on Haiti in 1825 an indemnity which it went on paying back for 150 years and led to its total impoverishment. 200 years ago, I'll be in Paris for a symposium before very long examining all of this. So, lots of things I could say, but I don't want to fall foul of your judgment from the chair, and so I'll desist. And I hope people have heard my plea. Haiti exists. It's in a mess. Please let it benefit from all that we're talking about right now.
Merci pour votre intervention. Madame Gardini, vous avez la parole.
Ms. Gardini. You have to put your card in, madam. Now it's working. Thank you, Madam President. Colleagues. In recent years, I've had the honour of chairing on behalf of the European side the Association of Euro-Latin American Women. This means I'm in a position to share with you personal testimony as to the enormous strength of Latin American women, particularly when it comes to promoting freedom, democracy and human rights in their countries. Their work often takes place in a situation of extreme personal danger, but these women show enormous respect and deserve, therefore, both our respect and our full, unambiguous recognition. This is why I don't understand, in fact, I find it deeply disappointing that the choice has been made to remove a reference to Maria Corina Machado in one of the amendments to this text. We are talking about a woman who had the strength to oppose an authoritarian regime. She faced persecution, threats, political exclusion, and today represents a symbol of democratic resistance in Venezuela. If we're not able to say openly that Maria Corina Machado is fighting against a dictatorship, we can really ask ourselves serious questions about her own consistency. Moreover, I think it's important to remind you that just last year she received the Václav Havel, as well as the Sakharov Prize for Freedom of Thought from the European Parliament. It's even more serious that amongst the amendments put forward by the EPP, there have been sub-amendments, which means that the dramatic condition which Venezuela finds itself under the Maduro regime is not mentioned. In reality, the facts speak for themselves: a humanitarian crisis, economic collapse, political repression, millions of people forced into exile. I would remind you that Venezuela was suspended from Mercosur back in 2016. This suspension became definitive in 1917 for its breach of the democratic order, and I quote. I could say a lot more, but I'll stop there. So, the need to strengthen links between the Council of Europe and Latin America is, of course, a noble objective, and I share that. But we can't allow this to become a diplomatic balancing act, which would mean that we forget the values which we say we intend to promote. If we want to remain or retain any credibility, we have to put our money where our mouth is. For all these regions, colleagues, although I'll be voting in favour of the text, and I really am in favour of closer links and friendship between the Council of Europe and Latin America, but I'm unable to conceal my regret for all the missed opportunities here. This is a clear example of double standards. The fact that we're unable to call a spade, to mention with its name the worst dictatorship in the world, whereas with so many other countries we do that, that is something which I find hard to accept.
Madame Engelhardt, vous avez la parole. Merci.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you.
Ich spreche auf Deutsch weiter.
I'll be speaking German. Latin America is a very important task for us and a real duty. Now, I'd like to thank the rapporteur, Antonio Guterres Limones, for his very comprehensive and relevant report. Relations between the Council of Europe and Latin America are ones that should be strengthened. It's important. There should be, apart from a very few exceptions, we have exactly the same values, complying with human rights, the rule of law and democracy. Of course, it's important for us to expand on these relations because we do have tasks that we need to resolve together. I'd like to refer to policies relating to human rights and environmental protection. And drug policies are very important, in particular in the context of terrorism, and it has dramatic consequences for families as well that are affected by this. There's poverty, there's prostitution, there's violence and force, and this often ends in suicide. In the Council of Europe, we have a number of different agreements with regard to cooperation with Latin America, with the Palestine and the Organization of the American States. Mexico has observer status within our assembly, and colleagues enhance our debates with very valuable contributions. The European Court of Human Rights has regular exchanges with the Inter-American and the African courts for human rights and international law. The values of a society can be measured, of course, by exactly how these values are respected. Now, look at, for instance, violence against women, which is increasing throughout the world. If we want to combat effectively structural sexual violence against women, we need to change our outlook. Colombia, in the last few weeks, has introduced a legislation to protect female politicians from any form of violence. Through this, it's possible, of course, to promote more parity. It's to enable more women to take a decision to play a role in politics and to not have any fear of being subject to violence. It's so important for us to hear of these experiences in the Council of Europe, that more female politicians in Latin America can raise their voices so that we can learn from them as well, and that we can improve our European societies and make them fairer and more equitable. Let's make use of this cooperation. Let's strengthen it, and all the very best for this. Thank you very much. Thank you for your talk. Let me give the floor now to Ms. Estrella. You have the floor. Thank you very much indeed, Madam President. Colleagues, I'd like to congratulate the rapporteur for the quality of their report. Thank you ever so much. Muchas gracias, Antonio. I will continue in French because I don't speak very good Spanish. Strengthening ties between the Council of Europe and Latin America against the current world backdrop of instability represents both a challenge and an opportunity. Since we are currently undergoing a time marked by several crises. The climate crisis is no longer a remote threat, but it's a daily reality. The numerical transition is also both a challenge and a risk. Human rights are being undermined by a rise in authoritarianism. Democracy cannot be taken for granted forever. National defense now needs to include cyber attacks, disinformation, and the invisible front lines of artificial intelligence. And this very artificial intelligence, if it is developed without ethics and without governance, runs a risk of ending up being an instrument of control rather than one of emancipation. In this world, which is being fragmented by war, conflict, and uncertainties, the need for unity is greater, more urgent than ever. But it's not only a unity of interest, it's a unity of values. Europe and Latin America share far more than trade agreements. We share a history of resistance and reconstruction, of promoting human dignity in our political choices. It's time to transform this common heritage into a common strategy. I know Latin America very well. Over my 10 years as a member of the European Parliament, I was always a member of the interparliamentary delegations with Latin American countries. The Eurolat Assembly was created at that time, and I chaired the Social Affairs Committee. I therefore know that we can and must strengthen ties with these peoples with whom some of our member states already have key relations, such as my country, Portugal, and Spain, the country of the rapporteur. We can start by promoting dialogue between the parliamentarians of the Council of Europe and Latin America. This will promote interparliamentary diplomacy and will enable to ensure that human rights violations are in the spotlight. We're separated by oceans, but we are confronting the same storms. We can remain united, not as occasional allies, but as strategic partners. Thank you for your attention. Thank you very much indeed for your address. Mr. Komenko, you have the floor.
Madame Komenko.
Ms. Komenko? Let's then move on to Mr. Loukadis, please. You have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Dear colleagues, I warmly thank Mr. Guterres for this important report. Today's discussion is not just about strengthening relations. It is about choosing the kind of internationalism we want to stand for. Europe and Latin America are bound by deep cultural and historical ties, but these must be transformed into a relationship based on solidarity, justice, and respect. For decades, the peoples of Latin America have fought with courage and dignity against exploitation, foreign domination, and oppression. They have resisted brutal military dictatorships, neoliberal shock policies, and devastating inequalities. Let us not forget, many of these regimes were imposed or supported through foreign intervention. The United States treated Latin America as its backyard, orchestrating coups, supporting right-wing dictatorships, and undermining democratically elected governments, from Chile to Guatemala, from Brazil to Bolivia. These were not abstract geopolitical events. They cost thousands of lives, destroyed democracies, and left lasting scars. One glaring symbol of this unjust and imperial approach remains the inhumane embargo against Cuba, a decades-long blockade that has inflicted immense suffering on the Cuban people in blatant violation of international law and human rights. Europe cannot turn a blind eye. We must not remain silent. If we are serious about the Council of Europe's renewed external role following the Reykjavik summit, then our engagement with Latin America must break from the past. It must not be paternalistic, but rooted in mutual respect and shared values: the right to self-determination, sovereignty, and social justice. We must support the powerful social movements, progressive governments, and indigenous communities fighting for equality, land, labor rights, climate justice, and democracy. The security cooperation being discussed cannot be allowed to become a pretext for repression or militarization. Real security comes only through dignity, equality, and inclusive development. In this framework, this Assembly must be a space where Latin American voices are heard, respected, and amplified, where cooperation means sharing tools for justice, not imposing models of control. Let us build a new kind of relationship, one that stands with the people, not with the power. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Ms. Klemenko, you have the floor.
Thank you, Ms. President. I would like to begin, honorable members, by thanking the rapporteur for preparing this timely and important report. Today's international cooperation is being tested, alliances are shifting, and the rules-based international order is increasingly under threat. It is more important than ever that we stand united and strengthen our ties with partners who share our commitment to international law, democracy, and human rights. I fully support the report's call to deepen dialogue with Latin American countries and to encourage their accession to the Council of Europe's enlarged partial agreements. As you are aware, the process of establishment of the Special Tribunal for the crime of aggression against Ukraine is advancing under the Council of Europe's leadership precisely within the framework of such an agreement. This initiative is vital. It brings us closer to justice and so into closing the accountability gap for serious violations of international law. The tribunal is essential to ensure that the Russian leadership and others responsible for war crimes in Ukraine face legal consequences. But it is about more than individual responsibilities. It is about affirming that aggression must not go unpunished wherever it occurs. It is a matter of defending global principles where we all hold dear: peace, the rule of law, and human dignity. It is also important to understand that the war of aggression waged by the Russian Federation is not only a European but a global matter. Recent reports have emerged of foreign nationals, including Chinese citizens, being recruited to fight alongside Russian forces in Ukraine. Such developments highlight the complex international dimensions of the war and underscore the necessity for a unified and resolute response from the global community. In this context, the participation of Latin American countries in the enlarged partial agreement on the Special Tribunal for the crime of aggression would help build a truly global coalition and send a powerful signal that the world is united in standing against the illegal use of force and in upholding the foundations of a just international order. And I would like to thank a rapporteur for accepting the respective amendment. I will support this important report, and I ask you all to do the same. Thank you, dear colleagues.
Thank you very much indeed for your address. That now concludes the list of speakers. I'd like now to call on the committee to reply. Rapporteur, you have 3 minutes to reply to the points made.
Muchas gracias, Presidenta, querida Berna.
Thank you, Madam President. Thank you, dear Berna. I'd like to thank all the colleagues who spoke, and I'd like to thank them too for their contributions. We all agree on the need to step up our efforts when it comes to defending our values and promote cooperations with other organizations and supranational entities, and this is what we're doing. Ladies and gentlemen, in the most recent report on global democracy published by The Economist, just 6.6% of the global population live in democracies. I repeat, 6.6%. That's half as many as in 2040, but only 71 countries can now be described as democratic. This means 6 less than 10 years ago. This goes to show the extent to which our democracy, human rights and rule of law are in retreat. This report underlines the need for us to enhance links with countries which share our values, countries in Latin America, and there's no doubt that they are natural allies. I think the adoption of this resolution report will be a big step forward. As was made clear during the Reykjavik summit, we have to unite our efforts, work together so as to ensure that not only are we numerous, but also be stronger. Gabriel Garcia Marquez, the Colombian Nobel Prize winner, wrote a novel called Love in the Time of Cholera. This could also be the title of this report. Love is necessary at such difficult times. Madam President, I'd like to wind up by thanking, first of all, our President Theodoros and Despina, the Secretary General, for their support for this initiative. I'd also like to thank the former President, Tinny Cox, who went to Mexico and Washington to promote relations. I would also like to thank all the advisors and the team in the Secretariat for their enthusiasm and support. Finally, colleagues, I'd like to thank each and every one of you for your support.
Thank you very much indeed. Chair of the committee, would you like to speak? Thank you very much indeed, Madam President. Dear colleagues, rapporteurs, on behalf of the Political Affairs and Democracy Committee, I'd like to thank ever so much indeed Antonio Guterres Limones for the outstanding work that he's carried out to complete his report. I'd also like to extend my thanks to the President of the Mexican Senate, Mr. Gerardo Rodolfo Fernandez, for being with us online and for his address. I'd also like to thank all colleagues who have taken the floor for their comments that they've made and contributions to the debate. As we've heard, ties between Europe and Latin America are deep and at several different levels. The Council of Europe plays a key role with regard to defending the values shared between both regions by creating a platform and dialogue for sharing views among parliamentarians in the Council of Europe and Latin America. I think the Parliamentary Assembly should strengthen the agreement signed in 2008 between the Caribbean and Latin American Parliament, also called the Palatino Organization. I think this could be an opportunity for us to dialogue with our counterparts on different subjects of common interest, geopolitical tensions, respecting human rights, including questions related to climate change and the use of artificial intelligence and its potential ramifications in our democracies. I'd like, therefore, to call all of you, colleagues, to warmly support the recommendation resolution contained in Mr. Guterres' report, because it will provide impetus to strengthening relations between our dear organization and the Latin American continent. Following the call launched by our heads of state and government at the Reykjavik summit, we need to improve the impact of the Council of Europe beyond our continent. Latin America should be our #1 priority for this. And I'd like, last of all, to congratulate once again Mr. Guterres Limones on behalf of the Political Affairs and Democracy Committee for his outstanding work. I'd like to thank you ever so much indeed for your attention. Thank you very much indeed. The general debate is closed. The Committee on Political Affairs and Democracy has submitted a draft resolution to which 6 amendments and 2 sub-amendments have been tabled, and a draft recommendation to which 1 amendment has been tabled. Document 16029. Let's start with the draft resolution. I've been informed that the chair of the Political Affairs and Democracy Committee wishes to propose to the Assembly to consider amendments 5 and 6 concerning the draft resolution, which were rejected by the committee with a 2/3 majority, as definitively rejected by the Assembly. Is this indeed the case, Chairman? Yes, it is, Madam President. So if no one objects, I'll consider these amendments are rejected. If there is objection, we will need to verify that the objection has the required support of 10 people. Are there any objections? I do not see any. This means that amendments 5 and 6 of the draft resolution are therefore rejected and will not be dealt with. Let's now move to the discussion of the other amendments. They will be called in the order in which they apply to the text as published in the compendium of amendments. May I remind you that the speaking time for each amendment is 30 seconds. Amendment number 1 is subject to a sub-amendment. Let me give the floor to Mr. Pablo Hispan. You have the floor, 30 seconds.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just this amendment is to refer specifically the role of Maria Corina Machado, that she was awarded by the Václav Havel Award of this assembly. It is one of the links that we have with Latin America, and also remember that she was awarded because she fights against a dictatorship, the Venezuelan dictatorship. So I think that it's very important to underline this issue. Thank you very much.
Merci, Monsieur.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Hispan. Let's now move to the sub-amendment. Let me give the floor to Mr. Antonio Guterres Limones to be supported on behalf of the committee.
Madam President, I made my position clear beforehand. The objective of this report is to set out a general framework for relations with Latin American systems and sub-state bodies. We don't want to refer to specific countries, although we do recognize this will, of course, be part of future work. So we support the sub-amendment.
Thank you very much indeed. Would someone wish to take the floor to move against this sub-amendment? What is the opinion of Mr. Hispan on the sub-amendment?
My amendment, full.
Merci.
Thank you very much. Can you repeat what you just said, Mr. Hispan, please? We didn't hear you properly.
That I support my amendment, not the sub-amendment. The amendment that it is stated as an amendment number one.
C'est un sous-amendement, Monsieur Hispan.
We're talking about a sub-amendment now, Mr. Hispan. What are your views on the sub-amendment? What is your view on your amendment as sub-amended, based on this sub-amendment?
La Commission est favorable.
The committee is in favour. Let's now put the sub-amendment to the vote. The vote is open. The vote is closed. Please display the results. The sub-amendment is adopted. We're now going to come back to amendment number 1. Would someone like to take the floor to move against the amendment? No one? The committee adopted this amendment as sub-amended. Let's now put the amendment as sub-amended to the vote. The vote is open. The vote is closed. Please display the results. The amendment is adopted. As sub-amended. Let's now move on to amendment number 2, which is subject to a sub-amendment from the committee. Let me give the floor to Mr. Pablo Hispan to support amendment number 2. You have 30 seconds.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just to say that Latin America suffers the same threats as and problems like in Europe, as polarization, radicalism, and foreign interference, and as happened in Belarus, in Venezuela, the dictatorship has not recognized the victory of the democratic opposition in 2024 election.
Merci pour votre.
Thank you very much indeed. Let's now move to the sub-amendment, and let me give the floor to Mr. Antonio Guterres Limones to support the sub-amendment on behalf of the committee.
Thank you, Madam President. For the reasons I quoted beforehand, we agree with the first part of this amendment, but we've tabled a sub-amendment so as not to refer to specific situations in specific countries. What we have drafted is a resolution setting out a general framework with nations as well as supranational organizations as part of the Latin American system.
Thank you very much indeed. Would someone like to take the floor to move against the sub-amendment? What is your opinion, Mr. Hispan?
I prefer to maintain the amendment as it is.
La Commission est évidemment...
The committee is in favour. Let's now put the sub-amendment to the vote. The vote is open.
Le scrutin est...
The vote is closed. Please display the results. The sub-amendment is adopted. We're now going to turn to the amendment number 2. Would anyone like to move against the amendment number 2? No. The committee adopted this amendment as sub-amended. Let's now put the amendment as sub-amended to the vote. The vote is now open.
Le scrutin est clos.
The vote is closed. Please display the results. Amendment number 2, as sub-amended, is adopted. Let me now give the floor to Mr. Goncharenko to support amendment number 7.
Quelqu'un d'autre?
Would someone else like to move amendment number 7? No? No one? What is the opinion of the committee? The committee rejected this amendment, Madam President. Thank you very much indeed. We're going to put amendment number 7 to the vote. The vote is open.
Le scrutin est clos. Je demande l'affiche.
The vote is closed. Please display the results. Amendment number 7 is not carried. Let's now move to amendment number 3. Let me give the floor to Mr. Hispan to support it.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's an amendment about a paragraph that the reporter praised Mexico. Mexico, of course, is a very important country, but as our colleague has stated before, there are problems also. In a very important issue is that the judicial system, that the reform has undermined and the judicial system. So this amendment also suggests that perhaps there could be a need to ask for an opinion of the Venice Commission about the judicial system of Mexico.
Merci pour votre...
Thank you very much indeed. Would someone like to take the floor to move against this amendment? Yes, you have the floor.
Against this amendment, Mr. Hispan, and you know that this is a general report and it doesn't go into specific issues as it has been stated before. So there is not sense to interfere now with the judicial system in Mexico, which is something so specific from that country that we cannot accept it. And you know that Mexico is an observer country, and I think there are other ways than stating in this general report the specific situation of the judicial system.
Merci pour votre...
Thank you very much indeed. What is the opinion of the committee, please? The committee rejected this amendment, Madam President. Thank you. We're now going to put amendment number 3 to the vote. The vote is open.
Le scrutin est...
The vote is closed. Please display the results. Amendment number 3 is not carried. Let's now move to a vote on the draft resolution set out in document 16129 as amended. A simple majority is required for this. The vote is now open.
Le scrutin est clos.
The vote is closed. Please display the results. The draft resolution as amendment is adopted. We now... Congratulations. We'll now turn to the examination of the draft recommendation. Let me give the floor to Ms. Olena Komenko to support amendment number 4. You have the floor. 30 seconds, please.
Yes, dear colleagues, this amendment speaks of itself as soon as we are all aware that the Council of Europe has prepared the agreements, the treaties on special tribunals. We believe it is important that we will add and we will invite the countries of Latin America to join this agreement as soon as the special tribunal is established. Thank you, dear colleagues.
Merci pour votre intervention.
Thank you very much indeed. Would anyone like to take the floor to move against this amendment? No one? What is the opinion of the committee, please? The committee approved this with a large majority, Madam President. Thank you very much. Let's now put this amendment to the vote. The vote is open. The vote is closed. Please display the results. Amendment number 4 is carried. Let's now proceed to vote on the draft recommendation set out in document 16129 as amended. I remind you that a 2/3 majority is required for it to be approved. The vote is open. The vote is closed. Please display the results. The draft recommendation set out in document 16129 is adopted. Congratulations. The Assembly will hold its next public sitting tomorrow at 10 a.m. with the agenda approved on Monday. The sitting is adjourned. Have a nice evening.